20 million in South Africa, and there's no one actually going through the content as you post it. So we rely on the community to be, the people who are using our platforms to be able to report that, to ensure that, you know, we can take different measures depending on what the situation is. But yes, technology can also, you know, like how radio, you know, had an impact in Rwanda, can have those effects as well.
Anele, you want to reflect?
Yeah, I think the problem is that there's a mistrust when it comes to mainstream media as well. When you compare the coverage that was given to Gupta corruption or government corruption, as opposed to Steinhoff and all these private sector companies, people then begin to question, you know, is it better for me to be on a timeline kind of curating news and deciding for myself what is true and what is not, than to just be blindly consuming whatever I get from ENCA or the SABC or whoever else. So I think that's also the problem, you know, why is there not kind of an equal distribution of attention when it comes to issues like corruption, and it just seems like there is a media bias towards a particular kind of corruption. I do think that there is definitely fear-mongering that's happened as a result of that, and hate. I know during Fees Must Fall, any person could just screenshot a conversation in a WhatsApp group, and your name, you know, at some point I was being accused of treason, and my name was in a WhatsApp group that I wasn't actually in. That's not my number. You could just save anybody's number as Anele Nzimande, and that's it. So obviously, you know, I know firsthand what that feels like and how much anxiety, you know, you feel to be accused of something that you actually didn't do. And I thought of that moment this week when there were some leaked minutes on Twitter that was circulating from a meeting that Sir Ramaphosa was in with Johan Rupert, apparently, and there's also Thabo Mbeki who was said to be present there. And I thought, okay, this could be true, but it also just could be not. I mean, anybody can just type up minutes of a meeting and say, look at what, you know, white monopoly capital is doing in the country. Of course, I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious. I do think that we ought to always be concerned with the influence that business has on government. But also, how do we filter what's true and what's not? And I think that's just the biggest challenge now. That we need to figure out maybe in the room. How do you decide?
It's interesting that you say, how do we filter and how do we figure it out? My dad, who's a community activist, sent me this fantastic little note. He said, if someone says it's raining and another person says it's dry, it's not your job to quote them both. It's your job to look out the effing window and find out which of it is true.
Yeah.
And I think that is the big important challenge for us as journalists. We often think that if we put 5 different views on a platform, that we are doing justice to the truth.
Yeah.
And often our job is not just to reflect that there are different opinions, but to actually go and factually check whether things are real. And I think when we look at someone like Donald Trump that attacks the very epistemology of how we understand truth and get to facts, then obviously the conversation takes on a whole different turn. And so perhaps at this point it would be a good idea to open the conversation for some questions and some contributions and reflections from the audience. As I said, please put up your hand, indicate which organizations you are from, and whether you're going to be asking a question or making a comment. Open to the floor. I've got 1, 2, 3 hands. I'm going to take them in bunches of 3 and then the next 3. Okay? Are there roving mics for people? There's one over here that I don't really need because I actually happen to like standing. I sit every day for 2 hours.
Hello, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm privileged. I'm already holding a mic.
Okay. But I think you need to respect the fact that I identified you in the second bunch.
Okay, thank you.
So let's start with the person who has the first opportunity. Do introduce yourself. Thank you.
It's not working.
they'll fix your mic. Little patience.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay. All right, thanks. My name is Sikulegile Duma, and I'm from the National Business Initiative. Mine is a bit of a comment and a bit of a question as well. And then the first thing is, I'll use the USA as an example. I think the easiest one. But you used to find, let's say perhaps in the 60s and the 50s, that there used to be about 3-4 main TV stations that used to distribute news. And even back then it was known that a certain news station was leaning to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party as it was. However, the majority of the nation used to watch these 4 radio and television stations. And what you actually found is, because there was maybe a funnel of news as such, there was a central point that people trusted news. Despite the fact that you were on the left or you were on the right, you somehow had the same vision of your country. Today what we find is, and I think there are positives of social media, definitely, but what we do find, and I think social media enables, is you have people have completely different ideas of what their nation should be. And I think sometimes when we stand on the other side, we tend to think, well, that person wants to destroy the nation, as I've mentioned, have a completely different idea of what the nation should be. And I'll give you an example. So I'll actually mention names here. With YouTube, for instance, there's certain things that you watch, and there's certain things that it does recommend. And on a particular day, I actually went on to something, one Donald Trump supporter was saying something out of interest. And when I came back to my main screen, it had recommended all these Trumpist videos to me, And it made me understand on that day that, if you click certain things, the algorithms are actually going to force you to actually take that information in. And you can understand how someone gets trapped by this. And so my question is then, as Facebook, I don't know what YouTube is doing about it, but how do you make sure that the algorithms are not creating the split between people, that people have a completely different idea of what their societies are, and that they can't reconcile somewhere in the middle, as it be. Yeah. And I think sometimes you even find it within the Fees-Must-Fall generation, 3 years later, people that, I have only a positive view of. But sometimes you'll be speaking to someone and you'll say, yes, the world is unequal, the world is unfair, but that particular thing that you're saying is a conspiracy theory. It sounds true because the world is equal. And I think those echo chambers do that, even to people that are fairly educated and people who have a lot of information at their disposal can sometimes fall into this trap. And I think sometimes what happens in South Africa, and I see it every day on social media, I don't think you can have conversations and you can build a country when a lot of the information that we're exposed to is not real and is actually there to actually stir a social unrest more than anything.
All right, thank you so much for that question and reflection. We'll come back to the issue around the polarization of views and people being trapped in the echo chambers. Can we have the second person's question over here, please?
Molweni, my name is Luvuyo Matasa. I'm with Reimagine SA. Mine is much like my brother's comments, and also to echo Emilia and Anele's comments. Everything new is intimidating, and we tend to look past that when we engage issues of social media. And I like that you've touched on elements of, Emilia touched on elements of digital literacy. And my question would be to some of the owners, or call it custodians, of these digital platforms, how much effort is put into educating the users and consumers on this platform? Because I think that is key, because when my brother was speaking to the aspect of fear-mongering and the algorithms then playing to whatever the sentiment you are curious about, it's important that users understand that this platform works to advance easy consumption. Social media, I believe, also enhances the whole glass house syndrome. So people tend to forget that you're literally having public conversations. There's some people on Twitter that treat their Twitter conversations as though they're speaking one-on-one, when in fact you're speaking in front of your thousands of followers and having a conversation that isn't necessarily belong on that platform. So it goes back to that digital literacy and education on how to maximize the actual platforms. How, and this would be a question to Anele, how do you take the digital reality and ground it in the spaces that we operate in? There are people who are very comfortable sitting back and being activists with their thumbs and more than happy to retweet and hashtag and join the latest trending topic, but how does that conversation carry on beyond that actual day? And I think something that we've fallen into in the real-time space is one of Mandela Day. I always look around on the 18th of July and think how we've mobilized such important conversations, but if they're all happening in the same time, when do we have time to actually distill and consume what was discussed on Mandela Day, what was discussed during a particular hashtag? And the excitement that's created on social media and these platforms is based on almost the concept of FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. When you see a hashtag, you don't investigate the thread before you hop in. You hop in trying to see how many retweets you can get and how many followers you can get from being part of or associated with a conversation. And I think the skewing of perspective then happens on these digital platforms. And the last bit would be separating. So we all know no time in the history has the world had so much access to information. But because we are inundated with different thoughts, exciting topics, we have a lack of insight the world over, more today than any time in the past, because everyone is taking a very, I mean, there are even courses on speed reading because you have to get through so many volumes of information. And how do we, in all of this educating, develop that kind of culture of I need to gain insight from what I'm engaging and interacting with, such that I can drive the action on the ground. So a bit long-winded, but that would, oh, and the last one would be taking accountability. I think it's one thing for us to shift the responsibility onto the tech owners to do all this heavy lifting and hard work, but as individuals, are we taking responsibility for and accountability for how we perform on these spaces?
Okay, can we have the third question?
Maureen Rowland-Aitken of the Christian Development Trust. I know I'm not the primary target group for social media. That said, I have a child who wrote matric last year, and I realized the immense value of social media. A group of her friends, for instance, just as examples, they established a chat room where they're able to share views, opinions, and notes. They could help each other. They sent notes over and above the use of textbooks. There's greater efficiency. You know, if you want to set up a meeting with someone, you don't have to make 5 phone calls. They'd just send out one message, and the biggest problem was finding which restaurant they were going to meet in or which outfit they were going to wear. And even then, they could communicate that information so that they made the right decision. They might all pitch up in red. Things that were obviously incredibly important to them. I didn't think they were so important, but they did. So I can understand all of that. It's instant communication. But as a parent, my concern is the health issue that is related to overusage of social media. Again, my child goes to sleep each night with an app playing rainfall and things like that. That's how she goes to sleep. And I know that's more about cellular technology usage, but it's driven by social media platform usage. So my concern, and as I say it as a parent, is more about the health issues related to overusage of, or maximum usage of social platforms. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that 3 bunches of questions. Can I just have our panelists reflect on some of them? I think the one was about just the fact that people become more polarized because they get fed and you can't have a proper dialogue. Let's start there. I'll remind you of the other questions. I've written them down. And please feel free to chip in.
Okay. I wrote them down. I'm very manual, so I wrote them. I wrote them down. Yeah. So there was a question there around algorithms, and you talked about Google and YouTube. I'm not sure about that. I'll talk about Facebook and our platforms. And when I say our platforms, I'm referring also to WhatsApp and Instagram. So one thing that I wrote here is human instinct. You know, naturally we tend to gravitate towards people who, you know, who share views like, you know, the ones that we share and all that. But research that has been done, independent research actually shows that people who use our platform, and in this case Facebook, actually get to see more of diverse views. And we've sort of experimented with related articles, showing people different articles related to that article, not the same, but with different views and opinions. And we want to see how that at least how that works. But we're also open to other ideas and suggestions on how you think this might help. But I don't. You also raised about, you know, in the 50s, 60s, people having this same thinking. I don't think it's something that, as a tech company, we should, you know, have responsibility over. But it's a conversation that we can take offline around algorithms and all that. There was a question around how much effort is being put in ensuring that we talk about digital literacy and all that. We do have an office in South Africa, and we've been operating here for quite a few years ago. And one of the things that we are doing is contextualizing our resources. So we have a whole Facebook safety center that is just related to online safety and digital literacy. We have a local campaign called Ilizwe Lam that is targeting school children, but it's only not teaching them about online safety, but also about false news, fake news, because this is where it starts. And even though Facebook, you can only use Facebook when you are 13, starting from 13 above, and it doesn't have an age restriction. Anyone can use Facebook. So we are really trying. But one thing that I think is important to note is that we cannot do this alone. How best can we work together with you? After this panel, let's chat about how we can contextualize some of those and localize some of those trainings that we have, because they are geared for a global audience. How can we ensure that they speak to South Africans, they speak to teachers, they speak to different audiences? Sorry, I didn't get your name, and also just want to correct, I'm Emila, not Emilia. Yes, Emila. But I didn't get your name. I was supposed to be Emilia, but the person forgot an I, so I'm Emila. And it was a typewriter, so they couldn't go back.
What a lovely story.
Yes. One thing that we are working on at Facebook, we have a whole safety team, online safety team, that, safety experts that are working on. And one thing that they're wanting to work on now is looking at, I don't know the technical term, but shutting down the app when you've used it for a certain period of time, particularly for teenagers, because they can be on the platform more oftentimes than we don't know. But also one thing that you raised is around the things that they actually see on the platforms. So there's content that you cannot see if you're a certain age, that is geotagged or age-gated. You cannot see it when you're at a certain age. But we know, and it's a challenge that we have, we know people lie about their ages. We've had people say, my 10-year-old was on Facebook. 10-year-old is not supposed to be on Facebook, starting from 13. But we are working around that. And we are also working with safety, mental wellness experts like the South African Depression, SADC. And we want to get more information, how best can we ensure that it's a conversation that we can have, not just online, but also offline. Particularly also even around suicides. In October is something that we see on our platform, October and also after matric results. Students mostly posting about their results and really showing that they want to commit suicide even on Facebook Live. So it's something that we are working on. Someone mentioned about, whether, Facebook is really useful for organizations. Yes, it is. I think there's so many things. There's Facebook for non-profits. About 2 weeks ago, we had a Facebook NGO day. I hope there were some people who participated in that. But it's something that we're hoping we'll do annually, Facebook for NGOs. And if you can Google Facebook for non-profits. There's also Workplace, where it's free for non-profits as well. So many tools, and I think, I don't want to waste a lot of time, but so many tools that you can use that are for non-profit organizations. But the main thing is how best can we partner with you guys to ensure that we realize some of the objectives you have.
All right, Anele?
I wanted to start with the point on how to make the real-world activism that we do link up with the digital activism that we're doing. I think my first instinct is to say it does not have to link up. I think we have placed so much of an emphasis on social media as a mobilizing and organizing tool, and I think that's useful. But before Fees Must Fall ever happened, before the hashtag, before the birth, now we sit in a room and we try to figure out the hashtag first. What's the hashtag going to be? But then we strategized, we came up with the methodology first, and the hashtag came organically from the fact that, okay, now we need to call it something so people can find information easily online. And I think we must just remember that the real life work is what matters, because it's now set the standard, the threshold so high. If you're not trending on social media, are you an activist? If it doesn't have a hashtag, is it activism? And I think that's a problem, because some people are working in local communities, in villages, and they're doing really incredible work that goes largely unnoticed and largely uncelebrated. So we need to just forget about that. I think for me, that is the last thing. That is absolutely periphery to what you're actually doing. As useful as it can be, it's the end thing, really. When it comes to mental health, I think I spend so much time off social media because of the Fees Must Fall trauma, and I just couldn't believe that I could put out one tweet and it could get 20,000 retweets in 30 minutes. And I understood the pressure and the responsibility that came with that, and sometimes even buckled under the pressure. And I do think we need to be spending less time online trying to be visible and seen, and just doing the hard, difficult work of activism, even if you go unremembered and uncelebrated. And I guess that's contradictory, because I'm saying that on a platform, on a podium, on stage. But I've really tried to do work that is meaningful. The number of people whose lives were destroyed by that moment. We never anticipated that our voices would matter that much, and we never anticipated that social media would bring that level of attention. And what it does is that you're never alone. There's no such thing as solitude. You're bringing an audience into your bed, into your room, into the living room, into the toilet, and that's crazy and scary.
And yet everyone does it until they collapse.
Yeah, and I mean, there are moments where you need to draw the curtains and just be alone. And I think we need to try and do that for our sakes. I mean, I am speaking as a young person who's grown up in social media, in the social media age, that I've really become afraid of. So I try to post and go. You know that phrase? Post and go, and go on and live my life. And I think my critique would be, to the platforms, there's a reason why those algorithms exist, because they keep people there. They keep people angry. They keep people stirred up. So also I think the platforms need to take a responsibility for perpetuating the fear-mongering and the mental health issues. Obviously, if you're going to bombard me with this scary information, I watch one Trump video and you send me 10, what does that do to my psyche? What does that do to my well-being? And I think we need to start taking responsibility also as consumers of the content and creators of the content, but also the platforms that are hosting that content and how they're manipulating the content to make money, to make sure that people stay online for longer periods of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose the best example of that clickbait approach to news was the completely fake story on the South African version of the Huffington Post, who, by the way, has closed down because it's not profitable. And we saw, of course, the ending of one person's career as editor there for not fact-checking, even though whilst the story was being questioned, the writers were already defending why the story is up, keeping it up until it was almost incontrovertible that the story was not true, that it was eventually taken off. And yet there were defenses about that around, what it is that is actually news. But let's get to the next round of questions. The gentleman who had the mic, who wanted to speak first, second over there, and then third over there, and then the other two, the gentleman in front and at the back, will be the second round of the questions. Go for it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Name happened to be Brown Matsau. It hasn't changed, and I'm at the proxy. I'm here at the proxy of the Benchmarks Foundation. And my question, I think, in a way, has been addressed, but I still want to raise it nonetheless because I believe Ms. Gandhi can still, find a way to consider that. And Ms. Gandhi, I'm raising this question because I have a number of friends who have been blocked a number of times on your platform, and for things that genuinely, when one looks at them, question whether this is required to be blocked or not. And it is statements such as the number of people who would write, honestly, especially in South Africa, around the two most pertinent questions around the land, sometimes around race. And the kind of questions that they will be, or the kind of posts that they will be making, to be either be around afflicting those who are comfortable, but comforting the afflicted. And like I said, I don't want to mention some, but most it's around land or race issues in South Africa. They just get blocked for it starts first with 1 day, before you know it's 2 days. The next time they tell you it's 30 days, they've been blocked for saying things that are honestly innocent, not that they're damaging to anybody. Thank you.
Okay, second question. Can we get a mic?
Thank you, Karima. To my dear colleagues, my name is Seth Naika. I'm here with kind of two main hats, Cairo Southern Africa, and then a non-profit Heartlines. It's best known as a values promotion center, but at the onset of Heartlines, it really has worked in the space of media, utilizing media. My question, though, as a social business guy doing our work, is social media and the connection to marketing. Because I think that's, if one was engaging social media just around conversations, that's one element. It's almost as a purist element. But I think the marketing element is what makes it dangerous, because news then becomes a danger because of people marketing an ideology or a philosophy. On the other side, it's marketing for actually profit making. So, you're profit making on a product or you're profit making on a game. And I think that this is where we would also like to know, how can we, in a world that is now technologically driven, where these artifacts and tools have become part of our lives, how do we safeguard ourselves from that? But then also, I think it's the response of organizations that are owning these platforms to cater for the safeguard of the populace. In the same way that someone can criticize a marketer for having an unethical practice, then these platforms and these media moguls need to take ownership for not having what one can call occupational health and safety, because that has now become their virtual reality business. So kind of a question, but also comment. Thank you.
All right. Can we have the last question of the third round over there? Just pass the camera.
Hello. Akona Mashaya from CDC. I've got a question and a half, right? In society, there are hierarchies, and it's no different to social media. So how does Facebook look at that issue? So I'll give you an example. Okay, I wrote this down. So Facebook says society is in charge of reporting. So our question is, how do you put that much faith in society when these hierarchies exist, and when these marginalized groups come onto Facebook, they don't get the traction or they are shut down? I'll give you an example. When you come out of a Model C school, you go into Facebook, you start reading and you talk about white privilege. All of a sudden, the issue is now with the new activist who has that issue. Now the activist is the racist one. The activist is the one who's bringing the problem, but we are not actually being protected in terms of, you know what I mean. How does Facebook now disseminate that information and say, hang on, or do you just sit and allow people to literally bludgeon themselves with all this?
Okay. Anele, do you want to start? Just to refresh you, we had the marketing for profit question, the issue of blocking, particularly people who speak on issues of race and land, and then of course also the question of just aggregating the content and whether it's your place as Facebook to actually call people out.
I mean, I think the theme around this convention is to reimagine and redesign. And I would like to think that I'm self-critical and self-aware. And I think we just need more of that. I don't want to live in a society where no one sees the log in their own eye. You constantly see the log in somebody else's eye. And I think I don't know if I agree with the gentleman who just spoke now, who said, then the activists, you know, Facebook or whoever else is making the activists seem like the problem, but they're trying to address the problem, which is fine, you know, but is the problem being addressed? Let's ask that question. I think for me, having been a foilist, I sit all the time and I, you know, interrogate, should we have done that? Could I have done something differently? Was I kind? Because there was so much violence, even just within our own little circle, in how we treated each other, because we were so angry with the system. We were so angry with the institutions that you barely have enough kindness. You're so overcome by this anger drug and adrenaline that there's no kindness left for each other. So I do think we have to examine ourselves, you know. Yes, indeed. How much responsibility are we going to place on Facebook to make sure that there isn't violent content online? That's one aspect of it, you know, but what can we do? What can I do to try and make sure that I'm being kind to others? I mean, it sounds so idealistic and airy-fairy, but one of my previous bosses used to say, you know, Anele, you need to make sure that you're alive. You need to make sure that this world, this future that you're trying to create, you get there in one piece. If you can't get there whole, if you can't get there in a sound state of mind, then what's the point? What's the point of creating a future that I'm dead emotionally, spiritually, because of the methods that I've been using to create that world? So I think for me that left an impression on me, and I think as activists, as you know, people in our communities, we need to start thinking through, you know, the ways that we are engaging. It might be cool to say something because it's true, but can you say it in a way that is less antagonistic? If not for the other person's sake, for your sake.
Right. Ms. Gandhi.
Yes, there's so many questions, but I'll try to condense them and not take so much space. There was a question around land, the land issue and some people being blocked. What's interesting for me is that even when you were raising your question, there were words that you thought, oh, I can't say this, or I think. And I think it just shows how much sometimes we tiptoe on issues around race, around land, around so many other things. But I want to just tie up the land question and then someone who talked about reporting. So on Facebook, it's not, anything goes. It's not wild, wild west where anything goes. We have community standards, and these are the rules that guide what should be done or what can be done on Facebook. And these community standards, the criticism that we've received in the past is that they are too long, they are too legal, in legalese, they're too, we cannot understand it. I don't have data to download it. Now it's even in a shorter version. It's only 27 pages. And it's now, for the first time, I think 4 months ago, after Cambridge Analytica, we released the community standards to show how we arrive at some of the decisions that we make internally. So if you are on Facebook, and when you sign up to be part of Facebook, you agree to those terms and conditions, you agree to the community standards, but not so many of us actually know what those community standards are. For example, hate speech does not have a place on our platforms. So you cannot, and hate speech, for someone's race or equating someone to trash, like you cannot say men are trash. You cannot say black people are monkeys, or all these things. There are also rules around nudity, around child exploitation imagery. So while we do not proactively look at content, there are some types of content that are taken down by our artificial intelligence. And this is child exploitation imagery. That is taken down automatically. That is easier to do because you can feed the artificial intelligence with the information that you want, or graphic violence or something like that. But hate speech is difficult because there's a context and nuances and around hate speech. And that is not done by artificial intelligence, but by human beings. And when you report, every report that you make to Facebook, there is no machine that is looking at it, but it's actual human beings. Mm-hmm. And what our CEO announced, I think, beginning of this is that we are hiring 10,000 people to be able to do that. Not to go through the content, but to be able to act on reported content. And when you report your content, add as much context as possible, because we use our local languages. We have over 40 languages that people in Facebook talk in, including some South African languages. And when you report, include as much context as possible. If someone puts pictures of bananas on my profile, maybe someone say, oh, maybe Emila is healthy, she likes, but probably I'll understand it more than if you report it to someone who's at Facebook to look at it and say, but what's wrong with this? Because they only see that reported content. They cannot go to the post prior and, they cannot go through your profile. They just look at that. So provide more context if you can. And on community standards, they are not static. They are global standards, so there are no South African community standards, but they are not static. So if there's something that you see that you think is not working for you on our platforms, please reach out. Let us know that this is not working for us. One issue that we are having is around cultural nudity. We say no nudity on Facebook, but we know in our culture, in South Africa, we are happy, we celebrate, we remove our clothes, or during harvest time and all these things. So it's something that we are having a conversation about, and if it's something that we are not happy about, please communicate that. Even around land question, when you say blocked, I'm not sure if it's blocking by someone or blocking by Facebook itself. We can talk about that as well. But I also want to encourage people to someone said, there's too much foreign content, to create content in our local languages, to create content that speaks to us. But we also need an enabling policy environment, I think, for some of the things that we need to happen on our platform. It's Facebook, but it's Facebook in our country, in this continent, in this region. So we need to be able to ensure that also the policy environment speaks to us. Someone has said, we need to take responsibility. We do take responsibility as Facebook. I think 2 months ago we had our CEO in the US Senate, and we've been having even conversations locally with the information regulator around Cambridge Analytica, around so many issues. So we do take responsibility. We do not run away from our problems. We face them on. And if you think there are some challenges that we are running away, please do let us know. I think that's what I had. I'm not sure if I didn't answer any
I think you covered that. Let's take the last round of questions because we ran late, so I want us to finish by about 11:30, and it's now 11:15. So I've got the gentleman over here in red. There was someone at the back, and then this lady in the front. So shall we start over here?
Siyabulela Tonono from the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. While we're having this conversation, I think it's primarily important to understand that, or to admit that social media in and of itself is classist. Simply because when we look at the fact that in the South African context, access to internet is a struggle. So having conversations within that platform means you are excluding a great deal of people by just having those conversations within cyberspace. To further illustrate that point of the classist nature of social media, one, growing up in the Eastern Cape, for years there's always been, the tertiary institutions around the Eastern Cape have always been locked in protests. Your Fortes, your UNITRAs, your border techs, anyone who's grown up in that environment knows that student protests have been a central feature of that. 2015 comes a time when WITS and UCT decide, oh, we're joining in. And all of a sudden it becomes a huge issue and fees must fall is born. But that kind of illustrates the classist nature of social media. But my question, that aside, my question is really about, given the fast-paced movement around social media, every day on Twitter, there's a new trend. There's a new trend. Something is trending. I can't remember what was trending 2 weeks ago. The question then becomes, how do we, as people who want to use that space, move beyond just trending topics? Today, gender-based violence is trending because of the total shutdown. 2 weeks from now, are we still? How do we use that traction, or how do we use that traction that has been generated through social media to ensure that we commit to a cause as opposed to just a trending topic?
All right. Second person. Can we have our second question? Right at the back, the hand over there.
I don't know if it's morning or good day, so just good day to everyone. My name is Linda Mtungela from the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. I have a question and a suggestion. So currently, as everyone is making questions and answering here, I've been on Facebook since the morning. So what I've noticed is that between the comments and the status uploads of everyone on my Facebook page, there's just advertisements that I don't know anything about and I don't care about. There's nothing about education. If you find something about education, it's either a bogus employment post about Department of Labor that was not even posted by Department of Labor. I mean, with most information, recently we've had the passing of Mama Winnie Mandela, and then now there has been rumors that there's a lot of information that is being bought by people with a lot of money, and they just don't want information to be out there. For instance, SABC has a lot of news that they don't post about Nelson Mandela, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and other people that is actually true, that has an impact on our lives. And then you only get to know a lot of information when someone has passed, like Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Her documentary was played on SABC only after her passing. Now you get to learn a lot of things about her after her passing. Is it with Facebook and other social media, specifically Facebook directed to you guys, is there such an instance where you'd find maybe there's trashing news about Patrice Motsepe, but because he's financially wealthy, he buys you guys and just says,
no,
please box such things, I don't want these things to come out. And then mainly in the focus, because I'm also a varsity student, there's certain companies on Facebook. Recently, a friend of mine didn't have money for registration, but because of Facebook, someone was able to pay their registration through Facebook. Are such things being taken into account and being actually advertised in a more advanced space than just having to hear it as a word of mouth kind of thing? Because if I'm on Facebook, one thing I check is the new trend, is the latest pair of shoes, the new hairstyles and whatnot. But is there something else that puts an impact on our lives that you guys actually targeting so that it should be spread out there? Talking about the fact that men are trash. If I say men are trash, because I'm talking about black men, obviously, because I'm black. Now, most people find it's not a offensive thing to say because she's black and she's saying to black people. So we're surrounded in such situations like that. So that's my suggestion and a question, that is there such instances where people just buy information not to be spread out there in social media? Because even with the fees must fall issues, there's information that has not been said, you hear it as a word of mouth from other people, but it's not on social media. Is it a matter of it has been bought not to be told, or what? Thank you.
Can we have the last question?
Excuse me, thank you very much. I'm Judy Favish, and I'm from the South African Labour Development Research Unit at UCT. I found this discussion absolutely fascinating. I thought we were going to be taught how to do certain things, but unfortunately we haven't. We've had to kind of stretch our minds. But some of the ideas that this conversation has stimulated for me is that we, on the one hand, we really acknowledge that mistakenly we allowed organizations that were around at the time in the struggle against apartheid to be demobilized because of our trust in the ANC and our excitement about building the new state. And now, obviously, initiatives such as this have recognized the error that was made to allow that to happen. And we are in the process of really trying to rebuild a vibrant civil society. And an important component of that is obviously engaging with ideas and debates around things that have gone wrong or things that we'd like to see that should be different. But it's fundamentally about ideas. And it seems to me that a lot of the social media tweets and so on are useful from the point of view of facilitating and extending the discussions around ideas. But what I've got out of this discussion is that that is absolutely no substitute for really focusing on building organizations, and particularly drawing on Anele's point about the need to build collectives and build a collective rather than focusing on individuals and debates between individuals. So really it's about, my question or a comment is about, in the focus on social media and how that enables discussion of ideas, how do we ensure that we don't lose the idea, or not the idea, but lose the fact that ultimately, if we really want to hold government accountable to radical transformation of society, social media cannot substitute for the hard work of building organizations. And then the question is, what forms of organization are needed? Because even, in London 94, we set up all of these stakeholder forums, and many of them have become bureaucratized. So how do we ensure, going forward, that this process of engaging around social media is linked to debates about new forms of organization that are needed to ensure that we hold government accountable? Thank you.
Thank you. What a great question to end on. I'm sorry, there's another hand at the back. I'm going to allow one more, and then I'm going to get the panel to respond, and anyone who wants to make some final comments.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Paul Mabusa from Wheatbank Mining. I also have a company called We Host Technologies. I actually just came late, so I'm not sure if you have covered some of the things that I'm going to raise here. Number one is cyber security. I'm not sure if maybe have we considered the issue of cyber security, knowing that a lot of people who actually go into social media, they are not do not have a background on technology or IT or how to protect themselves against some bullying. And then secondly, protection of identity and also hacking of an account. You know, these days people have used to cloning people's account, claiming that they are somebody whom they are not. So I just wanted to double check with you, how have you been able to manage that process and make sure that the account owner is actually the person who claimed that he is? Thank you.
Fantastic. Last question over here.
Am I right? Yeah, my question goes to Amila. It is with regards the foreign interference in social media. And I want to maybe challenge her to explain if she would acknowledge the fact that there is also power of experience, which I think could well be an escalation to this, or versus the two, power of experience and foreign interference.
All right. Thank you so much. Panel?
I would just ask him what he means by power of experience.
Sorry, I said as culmination. I'm asking if you recognize the fact that there is power of experience. And this is about an assertion, short one from Karima, that social media is circulating, and then she named your country. She mentioned last night. And I'm just asking you, because it is the social media that is running around. Is it good? Is it bad? Do you maybe take into consideration that there is also power of experience in driving those kind of
conversations?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Got it. I think most of these were comments. I will try to respond to the one around buying out. Would we accept money from a billionaire to not have bad content around? No, we don't do that. That's not how we operate. That's not our business model. But I also want to just challenge you that you have the agency, right? You have the agency. So Facebook will not, because you said, when I log in, then I just see shoes, shoes. What about the other stuff that that might be useful to you as a student? You can search for it. So search for it within Facebook, and you also have. I think the agency as a person to look for the things that you are looking for, and it might not necessarily be on our platform. It can be on other things, or even in the library at UCT. You also mentioned that there's so many ads that that you see that you don't like. You can experience Facebook without ads. You can go to settings and say you don't want to see any ads. That you can do. And I just want to, on a comment, to just say yes. So before I joined Facebook, I worked in the civil society organizations, NGOs, for about 14 years. And yes, I think social media is not the answer to movement building. I think it's a tool that you can use to reinforce what you're doing. So as Facebook, we are not blind to those truths. We are not saying we want to occupy a space that people have. People do have the power. We are just a platform. We are a tool that people can use to connect, not just with friends, but as different organizations with the different tools, whether it's workplace, whether it's Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, that you can use, but will not replace the people, the brains behind it, and everything else. About technology or social media being classist, I'll leave that to Anele. but I also think the point that I made earlier about unequal participation, even on our platform. So I might even have the access, even Wi-Fi, but there are times that I'll keep quiet because I'll be trolled or harassed because I actually work for Facebook. So sometimes you self-censor yourself because, there are people who will be writing all these things. You want to write something, but you cannot communicate. So there are all those issues. And also just the cost of communicating. Would I rather watch her marching or would I rather go on another page? So I think there are different issues. There are different issues that can be, that we all have a role to play, I think, in terms of ensuring that there is an enabling environment, not just for Facebook, but for technology. Because I think we do take responsibility for all the issues that people raise. But I also think the moment we start equating technology to Facebook, we are getting it wrong. Facebook is not the technology. It's social media, which is part of technology. Media is still part of radio, newspapers, all these are part of technology. And I think we need to create an enabling environment for all these news mediums and everything to be able to work for the democracy that we all strive for.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be short. I think some of the questions that were asked were just echoing, some of the other questions that were asked before. But in terms of our activism, I think our activism is layered. I think activism, like I said before, it's you organize, you mobilize. But then you have to do, then you have to implement. And I think that should ultimately be the measure of whether or not we are effective as activists. And I think as long as you're implementing, whether or not there's coverage of that should not matter. I also think that there is a season of renewal and reflecting. So obviously there needs to be moments of silence. And I think there's just so much pressure to constantly be churning out ideas, to constantly be part of a conversation that you as an organization, you can never just draw back and say, okay, what have we achieved? Just quietly, not in front of anybody. So I'm a firm, believer in that we need to have activism that is layered, that is sometimes communicating, but also that sometimes just not communicating anything. You're generating the research, you're interrogating your successes, you're interrogating the information that you've accumulated, so that you can do better, so that we can improve, because we don't want to be having the same conversations all the time. Every year we are using the same, men were trashed last year, men are trashed this year, men were trashed next year. Obviously at some point we want men to just be men. and hopefully that's because the message that we put out will stir up some kind of, enthusiasm in men to be better people, and we can have relations between both genders that are not as hostile. And then I would say in terms of information, like the thing about the billionaire buying favor from a particular platform so that information doesn't come out, and we are entitled to that information. I think social media has created such an entitlement in all of us to information that sometimes we're not actually entitled to at all. There was a whole story around this woman who on an airplane was taking videos of a couple that was behind her so that she could generate content for her blog. So she had swapped seats with this woman. I don't know if you know the story, it was on Twitter. She had swapped seats with this woman so that she could sit next to someone that she wanted to sit with. So now she was saying, oh, okay, these guys look like they're hitting it off. So let me just document the fact that I put them together. Like, I'm Cupid in this instance. And she was basically just taking videos and saying, hey guys, I swapped seats with these two behind me, and they're hitting it off, and they're going to be this amazing couple, and I think that just demonstrates where we are. We don't have any limits. Everything and anything is up for grabs, as long as it generates content and retweets for me and my page. So I would challenge that question. I mean, of course, sometimes we need to know what's happening if it affects us and it affects the country. But I think sometimes, we just want to know more than we're entitled to. And we also just need to start respecting people's lives as lives and not as an opportunity to create content have conversation and make news, because I think that's just now objectifying people in a way that we shouldn't.
And maybe watch Karima and listen to a show for news. I mean, there are alternatives, that's what I'm just saying.
I think, before I say thank you to our wonderful guests, I'm going to bore you with another really cool thing that my dad sent me, and he's a really sharp guy. He says, under cool kids, talk about working class people. Under organizers, talk to working class people. And then the cool kid says, present in ways that signify they are political, but organizers present as approachable to the people they want to organize. And then the other cool kid says, use language that demonstrates how smart they are. An organizer works to convey complex political concepts simply. The cool kids exclude potential comrades who don't agree enough. Organizers move others toward better positions. Cool kids get to follow them on social media. Organizers get people to show up for IRL. Cool kids are uncompromising in their commitment to ideas. Organizers are uncompromised in their commitment to building power. Cool kids fetishize marginalized people. Organizers build solidarity with and among working class people and organizations. Cool kids use identity as a weapon. Organizers use identity as a bridge. Cool kids look at struggle from a theoretical utopia down. Organizers engage in struggle from current reality up. Yeah. And I think that is a really wonderful illustration of the fact that when we talk about mobilization, we can't forget about organization. And organization means real contact, knocking on doors, engaging with people, having meetings, having real conversations, persuading those who don't agree with you to get to your point of view instead of shaming them in 140 characters in front of an audience of 8 million people.
It's too AC now.
Whatever it is. I think that the point that Judy was making was that what we need is a reimagined society where we take ownership of our agency, where we don't outsource our responsibility either to technology, to leaders, to big, powerful men and women, but where people are engaged in acts of solidarity. The thing that irritates me the most about social media is that I haven't found it engaging. I have found it shutting out people. It doesn't allow people to have differences. I'm old, so I come from the UDF. I had to sit like maybe for 2 hours in a civic meeting convincing someone that not having washing lines in Mitchell's Plain is linked to the fact that we are not free as a people, we don't have the vote. And it took a long time because a lot of the people in the meeting were tired because they worked very late. They had to get up early because they were taking trains that weren't on time. But eventually we got them to make the connection between that struggle for the washing line and the struggle to be a free and sovereign people. And that you must do in their homes, in their places of work. You must organize them where they are at. And I think that it's great that social media is an enabling tool, but it is not, and it cannot and should not be a replacement for organization, for action, and more importantly, for solidarity. I think that's the other thing, the so-called purity of having every perfect thing in its place before you put your foot forward to wage any struggle. I think, with respect, Anele, had a lot to do with why the Fees Must Fall movement couldn't move off campuses and into communities, and why you couldn't get your mothers and your fathers to stand with you in that community, like perhaps generations before did, when they realized that the struggle wasn't just on campuses, but also in factories and in communities. So I think we're learning lessons all the time from young people, and I also think that there's a lot of ageism going about There's a way in which young people believe they are not heard because we dismiss their ideas, their innovation, because we think only the old have wisdom. But age there's no essential relationship between age and goodness or progressiveness. There's lived experience, there's practical knowledge, and then of course there's fantastic innovations. And I think we need to find and harness those things to begin to reimagine what kind of South Africa it is that not just that we're going to tweet about, but that we're going to work toward. We are behind with an hour, so I'm going to ask all of you to grab your tea and your nibbles and go straight to the rooms where you are meant to go. In each of those rooms there will be coordinators, and they will then break you down into your sub-themes. And so we urge people to commence with those discussions as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and thank you to our great panel. They are identified outside, so the ushers will take you. For those of you who are looking for your rooms, they are clearly identified.
And a warm welcome and a good evening. And I'm going to say this like thumbs up, because the thumbs up is a reflection of what's been going on with us for the last 4 weeks. This conversation, this dialogue, convening SA, hashtag convening SA, is something that we've been bringing to you, and you're very much a part of it because of so many people who've interacted with us, have engaged with us when we've been live, when we've been off airs, in not live here, but we're always online in terms of social media. And the issues we've been talking about are most significant. And therefore, for me, it's been a particularly important place or platform to be a part of. Let me just reflect. Week 1, quality education in our country. Week 2, anchoring democracy. Last week, which is week 3, economic transformation. Well, tonight is week 4. It's the final week of the series. Ironically, the topic, healing and reconciliation. Many may say we should have started with healing and reconciliation because it's that important. Having said all of that, that's what we'll talk about for the next hour. So as we talk, people have already asked questions ahead of the show. Great that you've done that. But those that haven't, you still have a chance to interact, engage with us all throughout the better part of the next hour. And engage is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Those 3 in particular. Doesn't stop you telling your friends as well. So what about sharing this link right now and telling others, so bring them all into this conversation. In that sense, what we do is we amplify what goes on here all around the nation. And as you know, how we need to amplify the important issue of healing and reconciliation. It is such a critical issue indeed. Right, let's get to the guests, but hashtag convening SA, do not forget that, please. Let's get to the guests. We've got 3 people who are going to help us with some serious answers around this. Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana is with us. He's the General Secretary of the SACC, which is an acronym I think everybody knows, the South African Council of Churches. He's also the chair of the National Convention of South Africa, which in effect is put together Convening SA. And if I go back to a long gone time, which I think is relevant to today, received an honorary doctorate at the Nelson Mandela University for lifetime community services for his role in particular to stop political violence in the 1980s and 1990s. We'll probably pick his brain about issues of reconciliation and healing coming out of that. So appreciate you joining us once again, Bishop. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Right, and there's more. I mean, that's one person. Sibongile Mkabela is with me, for the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. I've had the privilege of engaging with her in the past as well. If I go back to before, consultant for the UNDP to establish a presence in South Africa, and then part of the Mbeki administration with a project leading up to the establishing of the NDP, which is the National Development Plan. So Sibongile, as always, I pass by your work, but good seeing you next to me here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the third guest we have is Anele Nzimande, who's an LLB graduate at the University of Witwatersrand. That may seem the most significant. It's probably the least important one. There are more important issues. She's co-written a book, I'm very impressed with this, called Reflections on South Africa, put together by the SABC Foundation. She's also a legal researcher at the Center, well, was at the Center for Applied Legal Studies, and importantly, in terms of where she is now, senior researcher at the Black Stripe Foundation that produces that television series, The Big Debate, which I think many of the issues that we saw there, again, pricked our conscience, pricked our brains, and asked us, where are we going? So I'm going to do just that, prick our conscience and talk about this issue of healing and reconciliation. And of course, I will start with you, Bishop Mpumlwana. Thank you for joining us. So, healing and reconciliation. Have we healed? Have we reconciled? Why are we having this discussion now?
Actually, I tend to want to say it's healing for reconciliation. But I don't think we can reconcile without healing. And so that the healing actually is, South Africa is a wounded society. And our woundedness manifests itself in everything we say and do. Every protest, every experience demonstrates our woundedness. And we're wounded as individuals, we're wounded as communities, we're wounded as families. And at the core of that, which is why I like what the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund is doing, at the core of that is actually family, because the woundedness is in the family. It expresses itself in so many ways. I remember when we had the case of the students from the University of the Free State that had molested female workers at that university. And I was talking to the pastors in the Free State, particularly the Dutch Reformed Church, and I was saying, these kids, we can take them through all the disciplinary processes. These kids come from families, and those families have got their own sense of woundedness, and they are spilling that out in wounding other people. And it is in this that we have to deal. In order to reconcile, we've got to deal with who we are. We don't even have a common sense of what it means to be a South African because of the woundedness.
It's an interesting thought. We'll come back to that. White children, for example, children of apartheid South Africa parents, and interestingly, you, as a man of the cloth, describe them as wounded. Others have a different opinion on that. We'll get back to that in a minute. Let me pick up on your thoughts on issues of healing and reconciliation. Again, I'll put a similar question to you. Why are we having this discussion now? Does it suggest that the fact that we can even bring it up now suggests what?
I think when I think of South African society, I think of a marriage. I think of that point. Well, 1994 for me was the wedding. It was the celebration. Okay. But obviously, in order to make any marriage work, you have to do the hard work, the difficult work. And I think we didn't do that. We just thought everything was going to be fine. White and black, we're now part of this rainbow nation. And I think what I appreciate about the time that we are living in now is that we're starting to have the conversation. We are in a counseling stage. We're in the counseling now because we didn't do the pre-counseling, and Bishop knows the importance of pre-counseling before you even have the wedding, so that you know what you're getting yourself into. And I think we thought it was just going to be a big honeymoon. And it really, really wasn't, because it wasn't love at first sight. You were putting people together that have been at loggerheads for over a century. And I think at least now we are having a conversation about how the reconciliation can happen in real terms. We've recognized that just putting a bandage over a gaping wound is not going to heal our society. We need to make sure that this time around we talk about the difficult issues, because the healing, as Bishop says, is multi-layered. We need to heal each other as Black people. First of all, for letting each other down, for the spying, for the government now that has let us down. And then we need to heal the Indians, apparently, right? Because they were more privileged than Black people. And then we need to heal the colored people. And then we all need to heal from the white supremacist
this is
racism.
Our very first consulting session to heal the nation.
Yes,
my goodness.
so layered.
Okay, I'll pick up on some of the things you mentioned. Let me just bring in.
I like that.
I'm sure you want to add to this. So, and I'll put a similar thing to you. Are you surprised we're having this discussion now?
No,
not just us literally, but the country.
I'm not surprised that the country is where it is, and part of it, and a big part of it. Yes, there's healing. Yes, there's reconciliation. There's hard work to be done. The thing is, it's hard to understand where we're going, because until you know where you are going, It's hard enough now to even know where we're coming from. And we're trying to brush that off. We don't know where we are. We don't know where you're going. And from where I sit, I look at it from looking at the families that we work with, looking at the children that we work with. And there's joy, there's excitement, there is so much talent, there's so much capability. And yet, we seem to be a society that doesn't seem to know what to do with good. And in some ways, whilst we're hurting, we're wounded, we need to heal. At the same time, I'm a mother. Whilst you're a mom and you're healing from a wound, you still look at your child who needs your love.
Yeah.
So you still give love. You still nurture. You still wake up in the morning. It's not about you. It's about your children and bringing them up. And I don't think whilst we're looking at the big picture, we had enough time to create environments that we wanted our children to grow up in. So this conversation, the disappointment about this conversation is that people so young have to get into it at the level at which we get into it. This work, most of it, should have been done.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Well, the question is why. Now, I made the point from the outset, Bishop, that you're the honorary doctorate you received for resolving issues around, let's call it political wars in the 80s and 90s. Goodness, that's so needed today. What has happened to us in the last 20 years that we and I'm going to borrow that analogy because it's a lovely one, and I'll certainly credit you for it in the future. We had this wedding, right? And did we go on honeymoon, by the way, after the wedding?
We just ate the meat.
I thought the honeymoon would have been the Rugby World Cup of '95 and maybe the African Cup of Nations. So there was no real... And after that, it was over.
I think it was all the euphoria of the wedding day. All that was just wedding day. We didn't actually get down. It was at least in a honeymoon, you still get to know each other. We didn't.
Is that not the case that if the pre-planning to the wedding was CODESA, clearly, right? But in ultimately putting the groups together, the couple didn't really know each other.
No.
I can say for those that were conscious of it, there was some kind of consultative process in what was being prepared by the ANC called the Harare Declaration. Even that was limited because only those people in those parts of the country that were part of those processes were able to listen to it. But there wasn't, people are asking today why the SACC is doing a national convention convening SA for conversations such as this. And somebody is saying, we're trying to, when we say, let's reimagine, let's redesign the South African experience and reorganize for it. They say, but didn't we do this at CODESA? I say, well, CODESA was nice, but you know what it was? It was a conversation between the African National Congress and the apartheid government. It was not everybody's conversation.
So it was it not? But just about every party was represented there.
Yes, but they were either supporters, they were brought in as part of the de Klerk coterie. They definitely those that were already inside, and those that were outside. Really, the AZAPO didn't want to participate, and PAC didn't want to participate. Whom are you really talking about?
IFP came in on the 11th hour.
They came. No, they were there full time, but they were left in the election. But precisely as I say, all those that were part of the Bandustan governments were considered to be on the de Klerk side for the purposes of CODESA. So it was not. Even there, it was not all communities. We were just observers. There was no social media to participate. There were no talk shows to say, I don't like what you're saying.
So let's put it this way, and really we'll stay with the wedding theme that you brought up, because I think it's so good. Can we say then in that wedding, which was necessary by and large, right?
An arranged wedding.
An arranged wedding, clearly, because there were two people on this.
That's the right way.
Can we say, is it accurate to say there were two people marooned on a desert island, and they said, let's get married, and they tried to find another couple? It's like, we're only two people around, so we need to get married, and that's what it was. But if that's the case, were there flaws in the makeup in terms of CODESA? Meaning, in those negotiations, moving away from weddings now, in the negotiations, were there flaws in the negotiating that we are now bearing the brunt of now?
Yeah, the balance of powers, obviously, I was I was very young, but fortunately, just engaging with people who were there and watching material, reading, we know that the balance of powers was in favor of the government, the current government, the government of the day, the National Party. And the fact that the military would come into, so what is it, the Broederbond, the Afrikaner Broederbond, that at some point came into those negotiations on, what do you call them, a hippo, and, you know, threatened people. So I don't think that...
I think it's not so much the Broederbond, maybe the Afrikaner
Yes,
the business people,
That's the group that I'm looking for. And I think just the environment, to me, doesn't seem like it was welcoming. It's hostile. You're pushed into a corner. You can't really...
But were they? I mean, the fact is, and we will talk more about healing just now, but the fact is, what came out of it? What came out of it is the most popular political movement of our time took control of the country. So what is wrong in that? And a political grouping that is headed at that stage, in fact, by Oliver Tambo, but then ultimately Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. So, by the way, if you ticked all the boxes, then you would say, well, we ticked all the right boxes by and large in ensuring the right people had the chance to come into power, and the right people did get into power.
I think what she's talking about is, when she says balance of forces, it is true in that there was no military victory against apartheid. It was a negotiated settlement. But in the negotiations, you had a government of the day in place which had allies. It had business allies worldwide. The Western countries were all behind it. This is why, almost like in the Zimbabwean case where Lancaster House agreement said you will not touch the land issue for the first 10 years. And when you, at the end of that, it will be willing seller, willing buyer. So there was an environment which would not allow for the kind of change that people feel today should have been. It does not mean that we did not have lapses in the use, the opportunity that the governments had after that. But I think that the environment at the time was that it was actually such a huge breakthrough just to get the political democracy.
But it's also the fact that I talked about we don't know where we're going. We had understood at least where we were trying to go, because civil society at that time had already organized the original RDP, not the final RDP, which was version 7. But if you go back to version 1 and version 2, of the Reconstruction and Development Program was a deliberate plan of understanding where we were and where we're trying to go to. So in essence, civil society had a mandate and had an agenda. But with all the negotiations, of course, that agenda became a non-agenda. And by the time the watered-down version of the RDP, I couldn't relate to it, despite the fact that we had made inputs much earlier in the process. So it hasn't been a perfect process. It is extremely problematic, but I think I also want to just come back and say, I think we also put too much onto it. When it was just meant to help us cross the bridge, that's all it was. Just help us cross over that bridge, that's it, and then start building. We thought that's what it is. So we caught up in a situation where we were trying to make just a little bridge become our universe. That's not what it is. We need to break it down and start over again.
Well, I'll tell you what, maybe it's a good time just to ask all three of the same questions. I want to get an answer on this one. So when we say we need to heal, what is your understanding by that phrase or that word, we need to heal?
We need to come to terms with who we are, I as an individual. I mean, we used to say this in the black consciousness context, that you could not get a non-racial society where blacks don't take themselves seriously as human beings. And if you grow up in an environment that says you're nothing, that in itself, that whole life environment is a wounding and it's a painful experience of life. Think about a girl child today. You grow up in an environment where in your own family, you are considered as less valuable, and you go out, you never know if you're going to reach the next destination without being molested. Your whole life is like, I make the example of a hare. Have you ever seen a hare that's not running? If it's not running, it's stopping for a moment.
There's a fear factor.
Exactly. Yeah. This is, I mean, that is in itself is a wounding experience. And by the time you get less paid at work, by the time you get bullied in gender-based violence, all of this is almost like I deserve it.
Okay. On a personal level, do you feel wounded yourself?
I have liberated myself in many ways.
So you're okay?
I'm okay, but I know that I'm wounded, but I'm okay. I'm okay.
Let's get another one. So, healing for you, Anel. What is it?
I think healing for me would be where we get to a point where we are seeing growth in the country. We see a lot of stagnation. We see a lot of despair. We see a lot of desperation. And I think I would use another analogy of someone who, well, I have a child as well. You mentioned that you're a mother. And I remember during my pregnancy, because I fell pregnant during a very, very stressful time of my life, it was during Fees Must Fall. And at about 7 weeks in the pregnancy, I started to obviously bleed. You're not supposed to bleed because of the stress. And I'm finding out during Fees Must Fall. And now, okay, I'm pregnant. Okay, now what am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to pretend like this is not happening so that I can still be part of the movement. And then 7 weeks, I experienced this debilitating pain and the stress levels, like I was carrying so much stress in my body. And I think what that experience taught me is that when you are not in a state of calm, when you're not in a state of peace, nothing can grow. Right? Like there was something that was supposed to be growing inside of me, but now it can't grow because my body is not at equilibrium. And it's no wonder that our society is not growing. It's no wonder that our economy is stagnant. It's no wonder that the pass rates are so low because we have not healed. And therefore, the growth is not going to happen. My son is fine, by the way. He is alive.
I was going to ask you that. You're fine. So.
And
he's growing.
Fine. And he's growing. And he's growing. And I've healed. I had to do so much work. After that experience, I was like, okay, I can't be in a place where I'm always angry. I actually have to deal with the fact that I'm angry at my government. And what am I going to do with this anger? I need to use it constructively to change my community.
We will call him the Fees Must Fall baby. Okay?
Yeah, everyone calls him that.
On the record, the Fees Must Fall baby. Healing to you?
I think for me, healing would, there's lots of healing that has happened. But I think there are certain things that we need to guarantee people. We need to guarantee them safety. We need to guarantee them security. We need to guarantee them opportunities. It's not as there's never going to be a big injection of healing and we're healed. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you have to build this bottom up. And what does need to happen, which disappoints me gravely, is South Africa, I don't understand the kind of society we've become in terms of leadership. I grew up and participated in South Africa where leaders were on the ground. Leaders knew what was going on with the people. So leaders emerged off the ground. I'm now sitting with people whose names I don't know, who call themselves leaders, who when they walk in the room, everybody stands. And on the ground, the people who are holding things together are the people we recognize. I mean, right now, I can't think of any community leaders. And yet I come from a society where community leaders were valued. And why is that important? If we're going to anchor values in families, in communities, in churches, in schools, we can't do that from a press conference. If we're going to think we're going to do it at a press conference, we're mistaken. We're also not going to do it at an SACC conference. At the end of the day, it's going to have to cascade right down to the families, and they don't have to feel they are being used to be something.
And it's something, I'll tell you what, it's something that we need to consider at some stage, which is, what is the role of community? What is the role of faith-based organizations? And did something happen around that period of the United Democratic Front and all the exiles coming back to the country, and then a new political power took over the leadership of the country, and then community just suddenly said, okay, the only people that are in charge now would be MPs in Parliament, people who seem to represent us, but they actually don't quite represent us. There's this vacuum around there. Just by the way, you can connect. If you're enjoying the show right now, like, what about a thumbs up? Because you're watching us on social media and various platforms, thumbs up will do. Just say that I like. But you can also be very specific in your comments, okay? And if that's the case, we would either read some of it now, or maybe even after the show. We'd certainly make a point of checking it out. The important issue around that, right, is that you add strong views and perhaps give us solutions. Now, some people have already tweeted and Facebooked us, and on YouTube they've also commented as well. I'm going to pick out a few at random, right, that have certainly got us thinking. So Andy Wisner, Andy as in the letters Andy Wisner, saying, pray please for an end to gangsterism in South Africa and for healing, conversion and restoration in the affected communities, and saying thank you. Marius Luet saying, education first and foremost, then authentic conversation outside our comfort zone. Above all, respect and mutual support. And there's more. Asif Fulbulia saying, I was debating about whether or not to respond to this, but given the traction that it's been getting, I think it is necessary. My intention isn't to get into a Twitter fight. Just think that as men, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves about this issue. So he's basically saying, show me the way. I would think, Asif, your point noted. Sally Schutter, I think it is, or Schutter. I'm currently reading a book by Ankie Kruk and the co-authors. There was this goat. And how we speak about our traumas and how we hear or mishear one another. How do we create a real space for marginalized voices? And Obama's question, what happened to facts? Just making that point there. And the last one I can read for now, Aryan Bezedino saying, in South Africa, where much injustice has occurred through history, how do we as a country, hoping to build equitable quality, bridge the gap between modernization and new tribal belief systems that threaten to disassemble our democratic constitution? I tell you what, there's a whole range of issues there. And there's more, of course, and you can just add on the conversation right now and even beyond that. Let's pick up, therefore, on this issue of, if we say we need to heal ourselves, right? So heal and reconcile, and this form of reconciliation. So if I'll come back to the TRC just now, if CODESA was part of this marriage that we had, who should be overseeing the healing right now? Let's start with you. That means one person, an organization. There's a big convention you're having next week, I understand. But I mean, ultimately, who should be sitting down at the table? I actually want to go
back to what Bongi said about community.
Okay.
To go back to the UTNEC experience that you referenced at the beginning of the conflict. The conflict was between what was called AMA Africa and UDF. And the perception was that AMA Africa, that group led by Mzwandile Maqhina, was actually being used by the system. And it was a minority group against the UDF, which was the larger in the township. And of course, it was easier to just kill each other, and people are dying at the rate of 1.5 a day, I like to say, because there were 3 every 2 days. But the point here was to say, who has got responsibility to change this? I mean, why is it somebody else must come from elsewhere to make it happen? So all we did, and that is as a pastor at the local church, with other ministers in the community, we sat down with the leaders of both sides and said, give us a mandate, appoint amongst yourselves people that you trust to work with us. And both sides did the same thing. We locked them in a place and said, the whole of today we're going to be here. What vision of the future do you have for this place? Not everywhere, just this township. What kind of life do you want in UTNEC? And amazingly, they all had the same idea for the future. What must we do today to get there? That's where the problem was. Okay, because every one of them felt that, no, I don't have a mandate.
All right, so bring it to now. So when we say healing, and we're talking about the entire nation.
Talking about
who should set that agenda?
Well, what we are doing in this convention process is to not make decisions but we're actually saying, let's agree on what the values and standards that we would like to propagate for people to take forward in their own communities. And that's also why we are saying every ward in this country has no less than 10, 20 churches. Those churches are part of the infrastructure and the worshiping communities that brings families together. And in that environment, they can work with other civil society organizations to take responsibility on the ground at their own level for things that they can then percolate up. To go back to what Bongi was saying about leadership.
You want to pick up on that? Because, I mean, just before that, I always felt very strange that South Africa is largely a religious nation, right? And the majority are Christian, but there are sizable members of the Islamic faith, the Hindu faith, the Judaism, maybe Rastafaris as well. So at our core, and all of them have strong community base. And yet, I'm talking about now, I think they played a major role before. Does it seem like they're taking a backseat in terms of...
Everybody took a backseat. Everybody took a backseat because of the... I mean, I remember the phrase that I hated the most when the new government came in, delivery. I hated that because even in 1994, we could see, and I kept saying, The moment you go in to deliver bread and deliver houses, you immobilize people's agency. And there is no society that can be built without people's agency. And in 20 years' time, of course, we eroded all of that. We don't have much of that right now. So we have to rebuild. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a miracle. It's going to have to be bottom up. Also, we had a government that really, I think, and I don't want to be unfair, but I think because majority of them came from outside, had not understood the capacity
on the ground.
On the ground. They had totally misunderstood. They really thought they were coming to save us. And nobody needed to
So
be
I
saved.
use an example today, ironically, and I said, if you're a marketer, right, and a typical South African marketer living in Sandton, and they're asked to market a brand to a township, there's a disconnect. They need to spend some time in the township.
Absolutely.
Could we use the same analogy with these political exiles for good reason, but when they came back, they were out of touch.
They didn't understand. I'm a product of Bantu education. He's a product of Bantu education. We made it. The question is, how come so many leaders were born out of Black consciousness movement and other movements inside a Bantu education system? So you have to ask the question, what's working about this? And if you don't ask that question, the thing is, you're going to bring a totally new solution to a problem you haven't understood. You're going to say, get rid of prayer in our schools. We are in, you're going to put all the right dress-ups. But then you're going, in that process, you take away the wealth that had been built from the 1970s when there was, you have the lull of the 60s, then the reemergence of people, the Zanempilo Clinic, and the work that the Black consciousness did. So the level of mobilization in the country was extremely high. But I don't think our government, especially the one party, even understood, even vaguely appreciated the value in the country. I still think that many people in this country who would stand up and actually drive this healing process.
Okay,
but they're not sitting in government.
All right. Your thoughts on it, in terms of who should drive it?
I mean, I was also listening when you were speaking about communities, and I was wondering, is there such a thing as a community? Are there communities? Do we have shared values that we can all draw from and say, as South Africans, this is what drives us, be it Ubuntu or whatever it is, but I don't think we have common values that we can all rally behind. And that's part of the problem. I don't see Ubuntu.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again. I hope you had very fruitful discussions in your breakaway groups. I was able to pop in at the Economic Transformation Group, and it looked quite interesting there. I happened to bump into the former Deputy Finance Minister as he was trying to make a quick get out of the building, and had quite an interesting chat with him. He's certainly very impressed with the levels of discussion. This afternoon's program is going to go as follows. We are now being joined by two very esteemed gentlemen. The one, of course, is our Auditor General, and the other has, of course, as someone who has led the path in this profession, Professor Wiseman Nkuhlu, speaking this afternoon here as part of the chair, or of the board rather, of KPMG, of which he is the chair. So it's my great pleasure now to ask both gentlemen, Mr. Thembekile Makwetu, to come up, the Auditor General of South Africa, as well as Professor Wiseman Nkuhlu, the chair of the board of KPMG. Can we give them a round of applause? Now, for those of you who have been in your various conversations, the question and the role of the auditing profession has, of course, been a central feature of trying to understand how it is that public finances have been mismanaged to the extent that they've been described by the study of the academics in the Betrayal of the Promise as akin to a coup. We're not talking here about petty corruption. We're not talking about pilferage. We're talking about large-scale looting where you have a situation of a state within a state being created with a set of shadowy institutions repurposed for the sole reason to serve a criminal network that manifested, of course, as a political project. And we're trying this afternoon to understand where the auditing profession finds itself in this development and how they are going to play a role going forward in not only holding the line when it comes to accounting practices, but also their role as oversight. And we've seen, of course, the way in which companies, as they grow, how different departments and different sections, their interests begin to bump up against each other. So you have the auditing profession in the same firm and company often bumping up against people who call themselves risk managers and develop models and design models that make it impossible for the auditors to do their work, because the very same company is part of designing models to reap off the profits of the companies, which are, of course, their clients. And former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel told me once that we all know that capitalism is resilient and that it's managed to withstand quite a lot of blows, but it remains irrational, which means that humans need to intervene and create a set of rules so that we don't have institutions cannibalizing themselves, which we have seen, of course, in the auditing profession. Now, very recently, political parties in the National Assembly unanimously passed the Public Audit Amendment Bill to give the Auditor General the power to refer adverse findings in reports to law enforcement agencies. He's finally gotten the teeth that he has lamented about for so long. We now have a situation where these new powers, was always the missing element when we talked about standards and norms in the profession. Year in and year out, the Auditor General has documented an ever-increasing wasteful and irregular expenditure with no consequences for the culprits. A few weeks ago, the office reported a 75% jump in irregular expenditure by municipalities to 28.4 billion rand. State-owned companies such as Petro SA and Denel were also, of course, culprits. Now, these amendments will certainly help halt this criminal disregard for the law and the fact that the funds can now be clawed back from the responsible officials. And that is, of course, a development which is to be welcomed. And on that note, let me introduce to you this afternoon our Auditor General, Mr. Kimi Makwetu.
Thank you very much, Karima, for that fix. And good afternoon to the participants of the second session of the National Convention of South Africa. And let me also thank Reverend Malusi Mpumlwana for twisting my arm to come and speak here. I wasn't sure, Mfundisi, what exactly you wanted me to speak about. So I twisted and turned and made 3 different types of the things that I could speak about until I saw the official program, which guided me now that you were interested in me talking about restoring good governance in South Africa's auditing sector, which presupposed for me that this good governance that the auditing sector in South Africa was always known for is largely no longer there. Hence, the need to restore it. Let me start for the honorable audience, assuming that we understand auditing broadly, but let me restate it as I understand it as a trained auditor, that it is verification by others of the stewardship of those who were entrusted with the receipt and disbursement of property, originating when the transactions became too voluminous for the individual scrutiny by the direct owner. So the people who own these resources are no longer there, and therefore we bring forth others that we have trained to have a look for us to see whether somebody is not robbing us of our hard-earned assets. And I'd like to also just reinforce this by saying that this practice of auditing had its origins in the necessity for the institution of some systems of check upon those persons whose business is to record the receipt and disbursement of transactions on behalf of others. So I think it is natural that for a prudent person who is unable to directly supervise their own property and arrangements to arrange for this independent check on the stewardship entrusted with their wealth. And so the people who look after these people's wealth and assets might be called on to answer questions and substantiate facts from their own personal knowledge of how they handled the other people's money. And the idea behind this is largely to increase the confidence of the public in the ability of the organization to handle other people's affairs. Let's go back to one example that gave rise to the Companies Act as we know it today. It was way back in 1878, if I'm not mistaken, where the City of Glasgow Bank failed. And a year later, the Companies Act of 1879 was introduced, which called for compulsory audits, because prior to that they were not prescribed as they were prescribed subsequently in the Companies Act. And this was for all banks that were registered with limited liability. And the reason for this was because the directors of the City of Glasgow Bank had for years continued to pay dividends while hiding the insolvency of the bank by overvaluing the assets of the bank, undervaluing its debts, and misdescribing some of the items on the balance sheet as we know it today. Which means, therefore, that these directors of the City of Glasgow Bank, in the conclusion of the investigation that was undertaken, was that they did not undertake proper superintendence and administration over the affairs of the entity. This is not the auditors now, this is the directors of the bank. It was concluded that they did not undertake proper superintendence and administration of the affairs of the bank. And I'd like to emphasize this because this morning I read an article that reflected on the 19 billion irregular expenditure at Eskom. And the discussion of this article was about who were the auditors, where were the auditors, why did it take so long for the auditors to get to a point where they unearth such a huge number with 9 zeros before the comma, 19 billion. Now, I want to suggest that it would be impossible in many instances, and perhaps very inconvenient, for each class of person to examine these statements of account with the books that are kept at a company, because people throw in their money to the company and they do not have the time nor the expertise to do what is required. I'd like to cast our minds back once more to the period in the late 90s when there was a commission of inquiry that was led by Judge Nel, which was called the Master Bond Group investigation. And Judge Nel in this commission was tasked with looking at a number of affairs of a number of institutions and companies in South Africa. And I'm sure that the people in the room, many of them were already working during the time when the Master Bond investigation was undertaken. This investigation, when it was published in 1999-2000, revealed serious deficiencies in the South African supervisory system. It also revealed an astonishing degree of dishonesty, inefficiency, lack of professional integrity, and lack of independence on the part of some of the auditors that were involved with the companies. So I would like to suggest that we have been here before. The stuff we read about in the papers, the stuff we speak about when we refer to the likes of VBS and Steinhoff, was already reported to all of us by Judge Nel in that commission report, when he concluded that there is an astonishing degree of dishonesty, inefficiency, lack of professional integrity, and lack of independence on the part of some of the auditors involved with the companies that they examined. Further on in this commission report, I know we've got other commissions that are happening now, but this one is the one that happened in the late 90s. They went on to remark that it became apparent that with a few notable exceptions, the auditors involved seemed to believe that in addition to auditing the books of a company, their function was to assist and protect the management of such company as far as possible. They also seem to believe that the end justifies the means. Now let's just quickly do a rundown of what were these things that were highlighted to us then in respect of these high-profile company failures of the 90s. There was the Owen Wiggins group of companies that was placed under curatorship in 1994, and it was attributable to a failure of supervision at the time in the same report. I would like to suggest this is a stain-off of yesteryears. There was the Cape Investment Bank group of companies, the Supreme group of companies which managed participation bonds and issued debt instruments to the public, primarily to people who had just finished their working lives and they were getting ready for retirement. The Alpha Bank and Prima Bank sounds like a VBS type of the 90s, if we look at it from where we are today. What were the things that were found in respect of each of these? The report suggests that issuing of false certificates in respect of participation bond schemes was the order of the day. The signing of unqualified reports relating to blatantly false financial statements was another feature of what was common among these auditors. The failure to comply to Section 25 of the Public Auditors and Accountants Act, which prescribed reporting material irregularities, was another feature. And if you read what was in today's Business Day, there would be a similar feature in what was the matter in respect of the unreported 19 billion in respect of Eskom. Because auditors are tasked, even in the new act, which is the act that prescribes that all material irregularities shall be reported to the authorities for investigation. It seems as if it took a number of years before this total amount was quantified in respect of Eskom. Failure to perform procedures that are designed to identify all relevant material events occurring after a balance sheet date and up to the date of an auditor's report. Again, an item of 19 billion on irregular expenditure that accumulated over a number of years seems to suggest that this was a material event, even if it occurred before or after the balance sheet date to which it related. Failure to scrutinize the minutes of relevant directors' meetings where significant matters are reported to the entity, as well as assisting in misleading the South African Revenue Services in respect of the true tax liabilities that were reflected in their financial statements. Now, these are the issues that were highlighted in the Master Bond report, all out there reported in the public domain. But certainly, if we look at where we are today, these issues are no different to what we often pick up in the financial statements of many companies that tend to go bust. It was also observed in most of the cited cases in terms of the entities I've listed above that blatant dishonesty and inept management were evident in virtually every one of the spate of high-profile company failures to hit the business community. Danger signs were not apparent until too late in certain corporate failures, suggesting that auditors were not sufficiently rigorous in going about doing the work that they were expected. Now, what are the risks for all of us as citizens when matters like these are prevalent and pervasive in our economy? In modern economies, all members of society are actively encouraged to save some portion of their earnings and to invest it in pension funds, in unit trusts, in life insurance policies, in securities that are issued by listed companies, and the like. And they are encouraged to do so because few other means exist which could enable them to achieve capital growth and to provide for their old age. So this thing is almost forced upon us. We shall do this thing because there's no other way you can save for your twilight years unless you do it via these instruments, which must be subjected to the scrutiny of independent auditors. Ministers of Finance also constantly exhort taxpayers to save and invest for the welfare of the economy, hence often confronted by lack of savings in our own environment. I would like to suggest in addition that investors themselves are not adequately empowered to protect their own interests and are not enabled to make properly informed decisions. They have to place their trust in the efficacy of the systems of protection put in place by others, and in the honesty, reliability, and competence of the persons involved with those tasks. And I'm sure there are many other examples that we can list, but I'd like now to quickly touch on the role of the external auditor. As I said earlier on, it's about examination of the work that is done by others, and I think all of us have observed a widening gap which exists between the expectations of the users of financial statements and the product which auditors are prepared to deliver. And I think it's a critical issue that we must note as we go through this engagement this afternoon. Since time immemorial, accounts have been audited to detect mistakes and fraud, but that during the 20th century and after has changed because many of the companies grouped among themselves and started creating self-regulating organizations. Auditors began to disclaim the responsibility to detect fraud once they started confronting that reality. So this is a matter that happened perhaps many, many years ago, but we no longer have auditors owning up to the need to detect fraud. Not even the most vigilant auditor, among others, or regulator can stop a determined defrauder from cooking the books. That's the reality that we face, even though they do not claim responsibility for detecting fraud. But it is one of those things that is normally subjected to collusion between the people who drive the affairs of that entity. Now, despite the growth of national and multinational corporations, the laws of many jurisdictions still reflect the view that corporate accounts are audited and reported upon solely for the edification of shareholders. No mention at all about the malfeasance that we often pick up in the financial statements and when we go through financial reports. Disclosure in published financial statements and the traditional audit report are not designed to cater for the needs of the potential users themselves. And these potential users are many. Among them are shareholders, lenders, suppliers of goods and services, potential investors, creditors, bankers, employees, management, customers, financial analysts, underwriters, tax authorities, government, trade unions, and even the general public. At the point of presenting financial statements, nobody will ever know which one of these potential users of the financial statements' interests need to be taken into account. But there's a place for their interests to also be taken into account, even if they are not known specifically what their identity is. Let's look at the issue of the accounting language as a discipline, because this is a funny language that sometimes get us to get things mixed up in most instances. And there's this framework called GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting practice. In my view, it is a language by which assets and liabilities of corporations and entities are recorded in balance sheets, and their functioning is often stated in income statements. Now, accounting purports to present performance in numbers by the consistent use of a fixed set of quantitative techniques. Accountants can accurately depict the course of a business over a long period of time by using these quantitative techniques, which may not necessarily speak to the reality that is experienced by these potential users of financial statements. Accounting rules are important, and their purpose is to assure a consistent level of disclosure. That's why when you listened to the chair of the board of ESCOM last week or the week before, he said, if I use international financial reporting standards, there's no irregular expenditure. If I use the Public Finance Management Act, irregular expenditure is 19 billion. And I'm sure there are many people in South African society who are wondering, why is it that one of the frameworks depicts a zero of irregular expenditure, and then another framework depicts such a big number? And I'm sure there are technical explanations that normally speak to that. I'm not going to go to the detail of it. But the reality is that is a language that often confuses many people who are expected to understand what this information that is audited is supposed to communicate to us. I'd like to touch on a few things regarding the regulatory environment of auditors, in particular in our context in South Africa. And perhaps here draw some lessons from a paper that was delivered by Dr. Iraj Abedian in SA Investing in March of this year, where he looked at the likes of the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors, and he suggested that they were notoriously slow to respond to gross violations compared to other similar outfits, especially when auditors are concerned. He also drew attention to the governing legislation within which the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors operates, which is out of sync with the prevailing financial and corporate circumstances that exist in our environment. These are some of the things that I think, in trying to restore the integrity of the auditing profession, we need to start looking at quite carefully. The totally different regulatory framework, which does not assist us in unearthing and dealing with the people that are at the helm of some of the institutions that have been reported on in the last while. And maybe also I think what is important to highlight here is that within the profession itself, he made mention of the fact that there is no direct or indirect shareholding structure between audit and assurance companies and other associated professional service providers. Because in some instances you have a big firm that provides assurance services, but on top of that it also provides advisory services at the same time. And we think that some of these issues require to be debated so that we can get the best possible form of governance over these entities. And it's a matter, as I said, that must occupy our minds, all of us, because it is not just for accountants to decide how the construct of their services is to be defined and developed. As I conclude, I also think that the issue of accountability and consequences in our system, if I touch on the points that Karima has raised, where over many years in public institutions we have reported growing levels of abuse of public funds, but most importantly, in the most recent past, we reported this in local government, where we identified that close to about 52% of municipalities have not been able to collect monies owing to them within a period of 90 days. About 31% of municipalities have not been able to, have rather recorded deficits in their books, meaning that the expenses and the costs that they have incurred have exceeded the levels of revenues that they were able to collect. But the same percentage of 31% was also municipalities whose going concern to continue to be in operational existence was in doubt. And we think that part of what causes this is the cumulative effect of many years of these transgressions that were allowed to continue without any accountability and consequences being meted out to those people who were charged with these responsibilities. Some argue that it was because this is how the foundation of the laws that give rise to these PFMAs and MFMAs were structured. But let me borrow from the words of Jean-Jacques Rousseau when he wrote in the Discourse on the Political Economy, reflecting among others on this issue of accountability and consequences. And I quote, "The man who once gets the better of remorse will not shrink before punishments which are less severe and less lasting, and from which there is at least the hope of escaping. Whatever precautions are taken, those who only require impunity in order to do wrong will not fail to find means of eluding the law and avoiding its penalties. The reward of virtue soon becomes that of robbery. The vilest of men rise to the greatest credit. The greater they are, the more despicable they become. Their infamy appears even in their dignities, and their very honors dishonor them." Unquote. And we hope that by introducing these amendments to the Public Audit Act, we will try our best, at least from where we are in the audit institution, supported by others, to narrow the space for those who survive because of impunity. And possibly the fortunes that we often report on in the financial statements of public institutions will start showing a different picture. And it is our view that when that money is available and all the disciplines of accountability are restored, they are likely to go towards those things that get announced every year. Thank you very much.
Thank you there to our Auditor General. Now, of course, KPMG used to be quite a revered organization. What did they say? One of the big four, too big to fail. And then, of course, we saw the litany of reports coming out. And I was sharing some private thoughts with Professor Nkuhlu, just asking him how he's enjoying being back and so on. And the reason I wanted to get a sense from him of the company was because not so recently I was asked to do a presentation for them just on the climate in the country around state capture and the involvement of big firms. And I was quite struck by the defensiveness of the senior managers at KPMG. And this was already after the changes were made. There were a lot of overseas guys with some fancy English accents who spoke a lot of legalese. And I said to them, you have to decide whether you're going to do what SAP did, the German company, and call their own press conference and do a mea culpa, or you're going to get drip-drabbed into the public until you have no reputation left. You must make a decision. And I must say, when I left their offices, it didn't look as if they were close to a decision that was going to be brave enough to restore the company's image, because there was a reluctance to deal with what was not just a few rotten apples, but which in certain sections of the business had definitely become part of a cultural way of conducting business. And I was quite surprised at the lack of candor, even in a very closed session from some of those directors. But that was me from the outside. I am obviously not in a position to explain exactly what is happening there. But former finance minister, or another former finance minister, Pravin Gordhan, said that the KPMG leaders within South Africa must understand that they have really played a pivotal role in helping state capture. He was speaking, of course, about the relationship that they had developed with the Gupta family, and of course the huge amounts of oversight that was simply just ignored on a number of issues. So I'm very keen to hear the observations, the lessons, and some of the insights that Professor Wiseman Nkuhlu, the chair of the board of KPMG, will be sharing with us. Professor Nkuhlu, a big welcome to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very important and historic convention of the South African Council of Churches. I salute the South African Council of Churches for convening the National Convention, which is aimed at building public consensus on the value positions and standards that should inform policy options that are acceptable to meet the requirements of life and governance and anticipated in the rights culture of the South African Constitution. I am pleased to share my reflections on accountability in the auditing sector. I thank the Auditor General, Thembekile Makwetu, for his remarks and, of course, for his leadership in ensuring that the Office of the Auditor General is effective in its role of overseeing accountability in the public sector. And I appreciate the interest of his office in the performance of the auditing profession in general. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you would appreciate, my remarks on reflections are partly informed by the challenges that I'm grappling with at KPMG. That the challenges have forced me to think deeper and more broadly about the profession. And today, much as I agree and that we should delve into the behavior, conduct of auditors and the consequences thereof, I decided that because I make quite a number of these presentations because it helps my thinking. It clarifies my thinking about what I'm busy doing there. So today I've decided to focus, firstly, just a few remarks titled Reflections regarding the unique role of the auditing profession in society. I'll just make a few remarks about that, and then I will move on to talk about the KPMG story, and then finally touch on what I have identified as building blocks. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that given the recent developments in the auditing profession and growing public concerns about audit quality and lack of independence of auditors, leading to a number of audit failures and reports of audit firms colluding with state capture and corruption, it is time to revisit the reason for the existence of the auditing profession. Time to ask the fundamental question: why does society need an auditing profession? What is the unique value of the profession to society, the public, and the economy? I believe that the pride in the profession and the values that should characterize its members should be anchored on its appreciation of its unique role in society. There should be an appreciation of the fact that the requirements to uphold the ethical principles of integrity, objectivity, professionalism, independence, is not only an imposition by the public and regulators, but a precondition for the profession being able to fulfill its primary purpose of existence. The primary purpose of the auditing profession is enhancing confidence or trust in the accountability reports produced by those entrusted with the management of entities or organizations on behalf of the members of the public who are not involved in the daily management of the entities in which they have legitimate interests. Of course, the public may be investors, creditors, employees, taxpayers, as the case may be. The auditing profession has to enhance trust by verifying and expressing opinions that the representations made by managers, CEOs, boards of companies, ministers, are true, not biased, and not misleading. This is the unique role of the profession. The auditing profession is the only profession that is licensed and granted a monopoly to fulfill this role. The unfortunate tendency that has been creeping into the auditing profession is a drift away from the commitment to serve the public interest through enhancing confidence or trust of the public on the reliability and truthfulness of the reports produced by those entrusted with the management of organizations on behalf of the public. Audit firms have placed at the center as their primary purpose for existence the service to clients, and in many cases have lost their independence and have become advocates of their clients. The challenge, therefore, to the auditing profession is to stop the drift before it completely destroys the profession, its credibility, and relevance to society. They must respond and maintain a healthy balance between the pursuit of commercial returns and serving the public interest. They must restore pride in the primary purpose for the existence of the profession and adopt the values and standards as necessary tools to realize their reason for existence. This should be reflected in their mission statements and be the first item on their board meetings, EXCO meetings, and partners meetings. Professional services firms with roots in auditing should be mindful of the fact that in the minds of the public, their brands are associated with enhancing public trust. This should inform the assignments they accept, how they conduct themselves, as well as causes they support. They should avoid association of their brands with activities that are harmful to society, like state capture, corruption, tax evasions, money laundering, etc. They should have moral commitment, intellectual honesty, and robust risk management processes to ensure that they remain truthful to serving the public interest. Those who lead should be role models, and this commitment to serve the public interest should be embedded in their policies, culture, and daily conduct. I thought let me share this idea, because to me this is the central issue. You know, when an institution has lost alignment to its purpose, doesn't understand why it is there by society, why it is licensed, why it's regulated the way it is regulated. When pride in joining the profession is because it pays more than other professions, when what discussed at board meetings of audit firms, at partners meeting, is clients, and what more clients to get, how to get more revenue, and this issue of saying that what is our value to society? Our primary purpose for existence is enhancing trust of the reports that are produced, those who are entrusted with the day-to-day management of resources that society allocates to these organizations. This thing is lost, and when you listen to the language, to their reports, to mission statements, the issue is innovation, is all the other things. But what they have lost touch with is that their roots are in auditing. And if you talk about the Big Four, their claim to fame, the reason that they have attracted so much goodwill is because their roots are perceived by society to be coming from that unique contribution to society, which is enhancing trust, which is essential in the performance of an economy, of society, of the modern society as we know it today. We have lost trust, we have lost touch with this core purpose, and everything else to me is rooted in this. This is the root cause of the thing. And I hope those who teach accounting, who teach students at university, will reconnect with this. But the primary responsibility is for the managers, the leaders of these organizations, and to make sure that in the same way that mining companies and the other companies that care about safety, they start their meetings every day with a commitment to safety and the latest reports on safety. Professional services companies who are rooted on auditing, on serving public purpose, on enhancing trust, they should start their meetings with that, reminding themselves. They mustn't start by saying, our revenue, are we meeting our budgets? What are the new clients to target? They must say, are we remaining true to the purpose, to the reason for our existence, and appreciate the fact that their pride and what will always connect them with the good is when they are connected to this primary purpose. I'm talking like a preacher, but it's very, very important. If you have this unique role in society, unless you really appreciate that, you have got pride in it, all other things become formalities. Because if you talk to any audit company, they will tell you that our professionals, they sign declarations every year on independence, on ethical integrity, on all these things. They will tell you that in terms of our own rules, they must attend so many courses on integrity, on independence, on new accounting standards. There is no lack of knowledge. Is this lack of connection to the primary purpose for the existence that should inform your conduct, the values that drive your conduct? For me, this is the thing that I'm working in my mind as to how do we address this as the profession, and how do I deal with this matter at KPMG. Now, a few remarks and points about the KPMG story. In the case of KPMG South Africa, the drift away from maintaining a healthy balance between focusing on delighting the clients and remaining true to servicing the public interest, of course, went too far and the tipping point was reached with the events that caused devastating damage to the firm and its reputation in the last 3 years. Profit opportunities were pursued with complete disregard of the potential harm to society and the country. South Africa's outrage with corruption, state capture, and political abuse of power for self-enrichment that was expressed through media reports and public protests and campaigns from about 2014 onwards failed to touch the hearts and minds of those leading KPMG during that period. At a philosophical level, I attribute the disconnect with public sentiment to this drifting away from a commitment to serve the public interest and, of course, to allowing pursuit of commercial interest above all else. As a consequence of these blunders, those in leadership positions in KPMG at the time were forced, of course, everybody knows that, they were forced to leave. More action, of course, will be taken when the SAICA inquiry published its findings. KPMG finally appeared before the SAICA inquiry and answered two very difficult questions, and that report is likely to come in the near future. And we, as the new board there, we will deal with those findings appropriately. Since the damaging events, the firm has lost over 80% of its experienced partners, lost key tier 1 clients, and recently retrenched over 300 staff, and its revenue have declined by a third. In other words, it has paid a high price, and rebuilding is going to be long and difficult, especially regaining public trust and being trusted again as that agent that is licensed and granted a monopoly to fulfill the role of enhancing trust in the reports of managers, ministers, CEOs, and all those who manage assets and resources on behalf of the public, on behalf of people who are not in a position to be involved in the daily management of those resources. Finally, key building blocks then about just at a high level, what we are, how we are approaching this situation at KPMG. First thing is anchoring the business on a deep understanding and appreciation of its role in society. I'm not going to repeat that, but this is the key thing, is getting that. The values, the culture of the business has to be anchored on that. And this is what has to feature at every leadership meeting. And of course, when you are faced with the situation at KPMG, very big organization, very complex, it's important that it's inevitable that you start with a deep dive analysis to ensure that you understand the root causes. That is another major assignment we've been busy with, and I think that we have better insights now to actually start redesigning governance, risk management, and quality control processes. To deal with this culture that had departed away from the commitment to the primary purpose, we had to insist that one, there be audit reviews of most of the files, the audit work that was completed in the last 18 months. The idea there, the purpose, is just to check that, that there is no, the risk of another VBS or Gupta situation cropping up is limited or eliminated. Through that exercise of reviewing the files for the last 18 months, we look at the client acceptance procedures, and we look all the clients in the portfolio to see whether there are clients there that are involved in business models that really could be unethical, and make sure that we exit those. But in addition to that, we had to check this obsession with serving the client, how that could have clouded integrity, objectivity, and professionalism in the conduct of the audits. So there's the other purpose. But of course, as you would expect, a company that has experienced the kind of challenges that KPMG expected, a number of themes have come out in terms of things that need to be remedied and done differently going forward. And of course, it means retraining the leadership and also retraining the functionaries on the ground. We also a bold campaign to reinforce the professional principles of integrity, objectivity, professionalism, confidentiality, and independence. We have embarked on that bold campaign. On completion of these steps, we are going to relaunch the firm under capable leadership, and by that time, I'm sure we'll position it in such a way that it is fit for purpose to serve South Africa and the world in the 21st century. So my appeal really to South Africa is to give the young, talented people at KPMG, 2,000 of them, who had nothing to do with these shenanigans, with these blunders, because these were committed by the leadership, another chance to rebuild the firm. We think we understand what went wrong, and those things are going to be fixed, and the right ethos is going to be the foundation of the new firm that we are going to rebuild. Thank you very much. Those are the facts.
Thank you very much, Professor Nkuhlu, for that insightful input. I'm going to now open the floor for questions, but as we did this morning, I'm going to kick off by engaging you. I'm going to abuse my position as chair and put my journalist hat on for a second and kick off the conversation with one or two questions to the two of you, and then we will do questions from the floor. For those of you who weren't here this morning, we did them in batches of 3, and we got through quite a few of them. If you can just clearly state your name and the organization that you represent, you are of course welcome to ask a question or to comment or do both. Just try and be succinct so that we can get through as many as possible. I wanted to start with you, AG, around the new powers that you have been given. In light of the fact that it also came out that some of your staff faced physical threats in places like eThekwini, and the extent to which you have been able to, one, assure your teams that they can continue doing their work in safety, and whether you have the assurance of the law enforcement agencies to protect them, and whether any of these regulations have already been able to reap any rewards.
Thank you very much, Karima. As far as the threat to our staff is concerned, we have almost figured out that once you have amendments like these that are going to attach consequences, some people are going to be shaken by that, because it's no longer a case of here's 2 million irregular expenditure. We'll have a conversation about what you're going to do with it. And if you do nothing about it, nobody is going to be feeling the pressure or anything about it. So we knew that it will come. But because this is a Chapter 9 institution that operates within the constitutional framework of the country, there are certain things that we are allowed to trigger in the context of our law without standing in front of TV cameras when we're doing it. So it's not really a case of physical protection, otherwise it will be a massive exercise, because we've got offices across the 9 provinces, who audit every municipality, provincial department, entity, and national departments. And all of those people are assured that should there be a threat similar to the one that was reported in the papers, we immediately react by triggering those constitutional structures to take the necessary steps. And I think once we had done that within a reasonable space of time, our staff was back on the audit side to scrutinize what they know best. So we normally utilize that space in order to get back to the audit side, because it will defeat all of us if someone could succeed in threatening people who are coming to do a verification exercise. So our utmost objective here is to make sure that we can get people back to the site without having to cause drama. But the Public Audit Amendment Act, as you are asking the question, as well as the related regulations, once the National Assembly and the NCOP had given their nod on them, we immediately got into a work schedule to develop the regulations that are going to make these amendments practical. We're still in that process, and once that process is complete, before this current Parliament rises, we'll go back to Parliament and present them to say, here is the set of regulations that is going to drive the credibility and transparency around how we are going to implement these amendments. So ultimately, what these amendments seek to do is to take that item of irregular expenditure or any material irregularity that has been identified during the course of an audit to an appropriate agency that can go down to the detail and the staff behind it. Because in a statutory audit, what you pick up is just an indicator or a red flag of what may have gone wrong, but you still need to get substantive detail behind it, which ultimately, if there is a finding in respect of one or more individuals, it will also result, among others, in somebody having to make good that which has been identified as a financial loss to the public purse. And of course, it will be accompanied by substantive levels of evidence before you can get to that. So we hope that it will assist in getting people who ignore these things. Because once they are ignored, if you think about a situation, for example, at an entity like SAA, the reason that they asked for guarantees was not because of year one's losses. It was the cumulative effect of a number of years, almost spanning more than a decade of losses that were never attended to a point where the entity must now come back to the fiscus for additional resources. We're trying, among others, to avert that issue so that if it arises this year, we deal decisively with it within a space of a financial period before it becomes a massive nightmare over a decade or more.
All right. Professor Nkuhlu, question for you before I open to the floor. When I introduced the two of you as speakers, I made the point about the fact that auditing companies have different sections and roles. You have companies that are involved in auditing and also risk management for the very same clients that they're auditing. And as I said, someone like Trevor Manuel referred to it as a design fault of sorts, and that what you need is intervention, human intervention with sets of regulations where there is a kind of Chinese wall, if you like, between the two practices. Is that just a pipe dream? Should auditing firms be involved in also assisting the companies that they audit to make profit? And if they do that, what are the kind of internal mechanisms that they need to put in place so that they don't fall victim to covering up when those same companies whom they are meant to hold to account on behalf of shareholders, they cover up for? I think so. You can try it. Otherwise, you can come up to the podium. It is working. Okay. Can we have a roving mic, please? Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, the issue of audit firms that also do consultancy work, advisory work, is a matter that has been under discussion for some time. And following the Enron case in the early 2000s, the United States in particular through the SEC, came up with very strict rules that clearly defines what an audit firms, what services an audit firms is allowed, and what service is not allowed to provide to its own client. And I believe that we need firmness on that, clarity on those. What those rules are tried to address was the risk of an audit firm auditing its own work. It says, for instance, to a client, this is going to be your IT system to deal with this thing. Or it will say that this is your new methodology for saving costs, and then it comes back to audit that. It was to avoid those kind of things. And in my view, there is justification for revisiting the whole question of what services are audit firms allowed to provide to their own clients. The other alternative, of course, is to say we should have audit-only firms. But, you know, they are, for me, the other, that's another option. But the difficulty with that option, if I'm correct in saying that what drives bad behavior is this obsession with the client and also just revenues and not disregarding your other role to society. If you are driven by that, even if you provide only audit service, you will be inclined to cut corners to make sure that you get more audit fees from the same client. So for me, the rules about restricting what advisory services audit firms are allowed to provide to their audit clients is the way to go, and we must be very strict on those, and there is also strict enforcement by the regulators in this regard.
Thank you, Professor. It's now open to the floors. If I can have the first round of the 3 questions. Are there any takers? Afternoon fatigue? Okay, I've got one hand. I'm looking for at least another. I've got another. And I've got 3. All right, in that order, the lady in front with the scarf and the 2 gentlemen down here, and then I'll take the second round.
Okay. My name is Nindlandla, and I've got a question for the AG. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. So I just want to find out, from a capacity point of view, how much of the AG's office has, in terms of capacity, has been affected or was dependent on companies such as the KPMG as well as Koki, and what has that done from a capacity point of view, especially in terms of that creating a vacuum, and secondly, what does it mean from an opportunity to be able to open up the market for smaller players and broaden it out to be beyond the scope of the big 4?
All right.
Those are my 2 questions.
Can we have the second question over here? Mike, please.
I thank you, dear colleagues. Seth Naicker, representing Kairos, Southern Africa, and also Heartlines. A question, well, just put forward to both my colleagues today. Thank you for your presentations. As it relates to KPMG and state capture, I am quite interested to learn about the staff that were retrenched. And as we are here convening SA in a light of what we can still consider to be a racialized South Africa that is economically still imbalanced, what are the demographics of the people, of the 300 that lost jobs, as it relates to race and gender? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Third question.
My name is Amit Saluji. I'm from the Call of Islam. I've got one question. How long will it take to the recovery of the state capture? Thank you.
All right. That's a very short and succinct question. Gentlemen, you can pick and choose. Shall we start with you, AG?
Yes, is this on? As far as the question that was raised up front regarding the capacity, the way we dish out the work, and I think we often respond to our constitutional mandate, which is a universal mandate, which says that we must audit every single institution that is publicly funded, from national to local government. So we've developed a capacity in the office. Currently we are about 3,500 people across the country in all of the 9 provinces. And out of those, there are somewhere around 650 qualified chartered accountants. It has been a significant growth over a period of time. I think there was a time not more than 15 years ago where we were shy of 100 CAs in the office. So the office has grown significantly. So in the early days, we took a view that it is impossible for just us as an office to do this work on our own. We then took steps to dish out this work to quite a number of firms in the profession, both the big 4, the mid-tier firms, as well as the small ones. So so we are dependent on them to assist us with the regular delivery of this work. And we allocate work based on our requirements as well as our existing capacity. So the actions that we took in April, which impacted on the allocation of that work, which was no longer the reality for KPMG and Gongi, as you would recall, resulted in us having to squeeze that work into the office. And the reason for it is because it was already late in the day. The financial year end of government is the end of March. We already took the step a month after the financial year end. So it was going to be difficult to find another private audit firm to do this work. So we made arrangements for this work to rather be taken into the office. But the most important thing that we did also was to say the steps and the actions that we had taken in respect of the 2 firms at the time that we did in April had nothing to do with the competency of the professionals that were assigned to do these assignments. It had everything to do with the actions of the leadership in those institutions that started raising red flags in respect of issues of independence and carrying out that work with the necessary standards that we expect of them. So those actions were therefore in relation to those 2 issues. They had nothing to do with the staff and the professional staff employed in those firms. And that's why we were able to absorb the individual professionals to continue doing this work. But the sign-off of these reports was yesterday, for example. It's normally the 31st of July. The signature on those audit reports is now being carried out under the direct supervision of the senior managers of the Auditor General. Until such time that we go around the next phase of the allocation of work, which often happens every 2 years, will we then determine what those requirements are and then identify other firms that may well have the capacity to take on the extra work that we have pulled back. But the other part to this as well is that as the office grows, that is now the audit office grows, there are always opportunities for people who want to remain within the audit office and exercise their professional development within the office. Now, in order to absorb them, we also need a little bit of work that they will continue doing as they are remaining in the office. So we will rebalance the whole equation by taking into account the fact that there may be other firms that have capacity to do it for us, but we didn't struggle with the sign-off. For example, among the audits that we took back was DBSA. We had no hitches at all to sign off on DBSA. We took back the likes of Denel, among others, and a couple of others that are under the control of our staff. It had to require some tactical shifts in our planning system to accommodate that late in the day action.
Yeah.
Thank you, AG. Over to you, Professor Nkosi.
Thank you very much. I don't know what I do to this thing. Yeah, on the retrenchment, I do not have the breakdown by race and gender. But given the profile of professional staff at KPMG, KPMG's transformation is really behind the sector. So the majority of the senior professionals and partners, without saying they are white, who left the firm, and then the professional staff who are not chartered accountants, is quite varied. I don't have those details, but you know, because of the empowerment profile at KPMG, every precaution has to be taken all the time to make sure that whatever you do, you don't worsen a bad situation. So I have no doubt in my mind that everything possible was done to make sure that we don't end up, you know, with a situation where more black people or more women leave the firm. I'm sure that was part of the strategy. On the question of how long it's going to take, yeah, to recover, it's going to take long. We have just completed the root cause analysis. And the conversations with the staff about culture, that is going to take some time. One wouldn't like to launch, you know, a new KPMG without just getting some comfort that the foundations are right. So I think what we expect to see possibly by the end of this year is that the hemorrhaging, the loss of clients has declined already, but I think that will be controlled by the end of this year, because there is going to be a clear demonstration of the audit quality enhancements that we've introduced, and I'm sure that the clients that we have will be delighted by that. So it's going to take some time, but I cannot give specifics. But to recover the revenue that has been lost, I talk about a third revenue. No, that will take at least 18 months to 2 years. It's not going to be something that can be achieved, reversed in the next few months.
All right. The next set of 3 questions. I've got 1, 2, 3 over there. Okay. All right. Okay. 1, 2. Bishop, is your hand up? No. Okay. So, okay. The gentleman over here, the one with the dashiki, and the chap in the white shirt. Okay. Mike, up here in front, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Karimo. For me, it can be if a global firm can trust Professor Wiseman Kulu in turning around KPMG, why, as a first black chartered accountant, why they don't entrust him with his own company, with the whole assignment in the same volume that they are giving to your PwC, KPMG, EY, in that fashion, mainly to as well, living transformation, so that we can have milestones of where do we come from, where we are going, and who will be probably winning in all those sets. I don't think, I'm putting that point basically because I don't think it will add to transformation in him being a chairperson. But if the company was created, led by a black chartered accountant, to take the same volume, it would have been far much better.
Okay. Second question.
Dashiki. Luvuyo from Reimagine SA. And the question is, there's a theme that's coming up from this morning's questions that were posed to the young lady that was representing Facebook, and both you gentlemen representing a fraternity and a profession. And it's almost as if we sitting here expect human beings to act not like humans when they're in their professional spaces. And that's what's coming out in terms of what you've referred to as the blunders in the industry. And the question I've always asked myself around the auditing fraternity is, when you engage around who holds you accountable, the retort is generally that, and with all due respect, it's the only way I can capture this, it's the quasi-Hippocratic oath, where people say, my profession requires me to be held to a specific professional standard, and all that's well and good until a crisis reveals that that's not the common practice. And outside of those crises, we each know of auditors who don't behave in accordance to that Hippocratic oath. So how does the industry act outside of a fraternity, sorority, or a professional brotherhood, so to say, mindset, and outside of public backlash, who consistently holds the professional accountable? And I don't know that that's a question that is fair to the two of you to answer today, but I think it's a question we probably should be asking. Who, on an ongoing basis, outside of noting and pointing to it didn't work there, who holds the profession accountable?
All right. Third question. There.
Can I go?
My name is Bongani Shabalala from ICAR Connect. My question is pointed out to Babu Nkuhlu. We've seen on the news the VBS updated details of what has been happening in the interest of the public and in the interest of the industry. There seems to have been tensions between the Reserve Bank and the Big Four, including KPMG itself. Has there been, in the interest of the public, discussions between the Reserve Bank and KPMG in making the situation better for upcoming industrialists that might want to be either in the audit industry or in the banking space? Thank you.
All right. Shall we start with you, Professor?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. On the issue of transformation, well, thank you for the question. You know, the reason I accepted the challenge by KPMG partners is that, one, I believe that our profession in this country has been #1 in the world for a number of years. And not because we are affiliated to KPMG International, but the way that we are managing our profession here. So I've been part of that leadership of the profession over these years. So I'm very confident that we have capacity, capability as the accounting professionals in this country to manage, the complexity that we face. The reason why I see KPMG as a very important asset to the country that can also be used to advance transformation and black excellence is the fact that a number of firms that we started over the years, they have struggled to get the necessary infrastructure, systems to really develop and be able on their own do have infrastructure that can enable them to audit, for instance, Anglo-American, that has got operations here in South America, Asia, and all that. Over time, it is because of the complexity and investment that are required and your ability to recruit and retain these diverse skills under one roof. Over many years, these 4 firms have come out of that competition. There's nothing that prevents others from coming up, but it's just the investment and complexity and the difficulty of developing those methodologies. If we've got a ready-made KPMG here, with all that intellectual capital, with all those methodologies, with all those systems, with all those networks, why don't we just use that platform to really create a black excellence firm? That's the opportunity, that's the reason I'm there. You know, there's an opportunity there. I'm looking for black chartered accountants who are committed to excellence, who have clean records with ERBA, and not implicated in any of these shenanigans of corruption. They must come forward. I need them at KPMG. We'll be engaging quite a few. This is an opportunity for us to commit to be the most transformed firm in South Africa, characterized by excellence. So we're on that platform. I don't believe that you can achieve that by just, let's grow the smaller firms, but the difficulty is that they must merge and become and achieve critical mass. It has been very difficult. We made a small progress by combining Koboto and Sizwe, but it's difficult for small firms to work on their own to merge, because they need critical mass to have the diversity of skills. Here we have a platform that is already made for us. Let's use that, and this is going to be the most transformed black firm that is going to do big audits, you know, with multinational companies. The holding accountants are accountable. You know, what we call ERBA is not a club of accountants. It's a body established by government. It's not controlled by auditors at all. It regulates auditors, but it's a statutory body. So accountants are regulated, not by themselves. Sorry, auditors. That's why my remarks this morning, deliberately this afternoon, were about auditors. I didn't talk about accountants in general, because I just felt that let's focus. So auditors are regulated by a statutory institution and not themselves. So it's not a club that it's accountants under CICA who are not auditors that really are a club, and well, there must be movement towards regulating them. So, but that's a different discussion. If you are interested in that, we can pursue it. Yeah, the Reserve Bank and the auditing firms are working together on VBS. They are working together, and I have no doubt in my mind that the report of the curator and the forensic work that is being done will come up a more balanced picture as who did what and who failed to do what. Thank you.
I'm going to open the floor for a couple more questions. I've got a hand, 1 hand, 2, 3, and then, okay, so I'm going to have 2 sets of 3 again. The lady in the white t-shirt, to the gentleman next to, is it Judy? Next to Judy, and the gentleman right on the end.
Good day again. My name is Lindelo from Anglican Church of Southern Africa. Mine is not a question, it's just a statement that KPMG is currently looking for people that are dedicated, chartered accountants and qualified, that are dedicated on working with a clean record and everything. I just want to say I'm coming for that job.
Over here.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Paul Mabusa from Witbank Mining. I've got 2 questions for AG. You mentioned that you're working with municipalities, local government. I just want to ask you a few questions regarding that. under the Municipality Financial Act, I just want to know whether are you able to follow up and pin down whether the municipalities are actually following on that act up to the T? And then secondly, we are experiencing a lot of irregularity expenditure within these institutions. Are we following up in terms of, are they being accounted? Is there accountability taking place within those municipalities through your office? And then secondly, on the skills audit, as you know that we are experiencing quite a lot of incompetency within that space, and such that we have a lot of lack of service delivery that is being done as a result of a inexperience of work or skills or qualifications. So I just wanted to check from you whether does your office have a ability to focus on that skills audit so that we know that people who are occupying those positions are qualified and they are able to deliver on that mandate. Thank you.
Right. The gentleman over here.
Thank you, Chair. Aldred Genade, Northwest University. I want to put on table the need for morality. And so my appeal also goes out to the convention essay. And why this appeal for morality? We've not spoken about it at all till this time at this event. In the absence of a clear moral compass, we remain at the mercy of more sophisticated exploiters. And we remain a nation adrift in a sea of corruption. So even if we have a judiciary or a legislature that bites, it's going to make the thieves more sophisticated. That's the result. So my appeal is that even through this platform and the mobilization of citizenship for a morality or a moral code that I envision is comprised of religious and non-religious shared values like honesty, integrity, respect, honor, humility, servanthood, national pride. Those are the invisible things. Those are that's the glue that will keep together the vision of the kind of nation that we would like to be a part of.
Okay, I'm going to give the platform an opportunity to respond. I think a lot of the comments in this round were comments rather than questions. I think there was effectively one question, and that was for you, AG, regarding the ability to follow up at a municipal level.
Thanks, Karim. As far as our audit work in municipalities is concerned, it's no different to other institutions, in that we check to see whether they are managing and handling the monies that are given to them in accordance with the laws that govern how those monies need to be managed. So I can imagine that in the Municipal Finance Management Act, there are all sorts of other provisions that are non-financial that also need to be complied with, as you correctly say. But our mandate is limited to dealing with those areas that have got an impact on financial management. And we do follow-up work on those items. But the reality is that if you look at the reports that have been issued and the communication that has come out of the Audit Office for a very long time, has always pointed to the lack of responsiveness in addressing those matters that have been identified. So if it comes as prominently as it does on the area of financial management, you can imagine how it will pan out in other areas. For example, if somebody had to go through a particular regulation before they appoint somebody in human resources, if they can hide that and employ anybody, even if that person doesn't possess the minimum competencies to file employment records of staff, which is probably not a very difficult task. Maybe because they tried to employ somebody who is related directly or indirectly to them. They have flouted the law, but the AG doesn't go to the T in checking that stuff. So there are a lot of things that in municipalities are written in law, have to be done in a particular way, but the primary responsibility for those things sit with the council, which is the overall oversight responsibility in that municipality. They have to check those things, because they cannot be all independent institutions checking all single laws that ought to be complied with. And I think the point that was raised just now in front, some of these things have to be driven by values that institutions adopt, because it's part of promoting good and accountable institutions. I don't believe everything must be subjected to an independent check for it to be done. I think it's about influencing how the culture of our institutions, whether they are the institutions of local government, whether it is in the education sector or in the health sector for that matter. If you look at it, recently in the Northwest there was an expose on ENCA which focused on patient files. Surely, I mean, an institution that is driven by values that you have correctly highlighted ought to understand that there are certain people whose files are going to be needed in 2 weeks' time when they come for follow-up visits with the doctors. The fact that you leave them lying around anywhere must not necessarily be subjected to an independent investigation before you realize that you are actually playing with other people's lives. So I think that's the reality, because there are certain things which are more prone to being checked, but others just need to be influenced. And if you've got an institution with the appropriate remedies to attach consequences to somebody, we might probably see a different behavior. But that cannot exist alone. We've got to promote the values that we need to develop strong institutions. One of the things that is necessary for us is we've committed as a country to doing all sorts of things, including delivering on sustainable development goals. Those things are going to be with us for many years, and we cannot afford to build up significant numbers of people having to check whether this particular education standard you've delivered is in accordance with what was agreed 5 years ago. Some of those things are quite impossible to do. So we do the best we can, at least insofar as looking at, for example, what causes the deviation from managing finances the way it should be. Sometimes we find situations where the person who has been placed in a CFO position was just a mere treasurer. You know, they normally call them a treasurer of a branch somewhere, and then they get told that, you know, you were good at managing the money that was needed for workshops and stuff like that. Come here, we will get you to run the finances of this municipality. Now, that is exactly the kind of example we are giving, which is putting somebody in a position of authority without the appropriate competencies. Because what it does, it opens the floodgates for those that know better. Because they are going to channel every single transaction through that person who has absolutely no idea how to check an appropriate invoice and how to put that particular invoice into the right account. And that's why you find people loot ad infinitum, because a combination of that lack of competence and lack of oversight is a ripe and ready environment for looting.
Okay, I'm going to take the last round of questions, but before I do that, I've got one question for you, AG, before I open to the floor. The head of SCOPA, Mr. Themba Gowdy, when there was a cabinet reshuffle by President Cyril Ramaphosa, made an extraordinary remark, and as far as I can remember, I haven't heard any SCOPA chair say that about any minister. He said that Nomvula Mokonyane cannot be a minister of another ministry because of her track record in the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. And he urged and asked for her replacement, Mr. Gugile Nkwinti, who was the land minister, to appear before the SCOPA so they could brief him about the shell that they had found, that the department was devoid of a cent and it was devoid of any skilled personnel, and that they were acting individuals. Now, obviously, Parliament has some kind of teeth. Everyone accounts to Parliament. What is your relationship to SCOPA in an instance like that? And more importantly, if it's the prerogative of the President to hire and fire executives, can you as AG, together with SCOPA, say, on the strength of what Mr. Gowdy is saying, that Ms. Nomvula Mokonyane cannot be an executive until she has explained what she's done with the money in water and sanitation. Does the new act, for example, give you that? Because I know that you are able to use this as an instrument to get money back from accounting officers. But can you do that with political heads, for example?
As far as I can remember, Karim, that thing was always called prerogative. You remember that word?
Yes, and I know oversight also from Parliament.
Yeah, so as far as I remember, it has never changed. Even as the new Public Audit Act is being amended, it still remains what is called a prerogative. So we normally treat it as a prerogative. But what we have done with SCOPA, as we often do, they had indicated even prior to that exercise of the prerogative, they had indicated that they are interested to get some insights from us as an audit office, as they often do with any other institution, as to the substantive and qualitative issues that are behind the numbers that you normally see in the financial statements. And we've already done that.
So that's it with SCOPA now?
Yes. No, it is only to that extent that we can do anything about it, because we ourselves in our law have got no prerogative to do anything else other than just to communicate the outcomes. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor now. I see there's a good couple of hands. I've got 2 hands over there, 1 hand over here. Okay, let's go. You've got the mic?
Thank you, Karima. Yeah, I want to commend both presenters for putting South Africa first. And thank you. My question is, and I think you would, the Auditor General would share with us partly. The Guptas has been visitors on our screens at home for some time, and we don't see them visiting us now on our televisions. How far is it with at least with the figures that were put before the nation or before some of us that have gone somewhere, maybe abroad? What strong arm would the Auditor General, apply? I know it's outside the report, but I think it is interesting to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Luzan Lemolo. I've got 2 questions that I really want to ask. The first one is to ask the AG in terms of asking. I can see the professional reporting that happens where you give a report to Parliament, you give a report to that body. Isn't there a need, and if it's possible from your side, to find social partners that you can interact with consistently enough, firstly to break the distance between the professional and the languages that come with that, so that my mother, who knows nothing about accounting, but knows when there's no water in the street, in the tap, that somebody's stealing some money somewhere, so that we're able to allow society to be partners with you in the broader sense of it, so that the accountability is not only to the professionals, nor is it only to the security system, because the security system itself can be manipulated, we have seen. So that when you do your work, the community is with you, and you are operating with that community to hold everybody else accountable, to check if there's a sense like that. To Professor Ngutlu, there's an indication that part of what you deal with is a formation of the human being in the accounting profession. Trying to check whether in your mind there's any engagement with institutions, having learned from what we've learned, to try and ask the question whether ethics and the formation of the individual is part of the core teaching and the aim of these institutions, or are we just giving people technical ability rather than forming human beings who must now act in that capacity to serve society? That's those 2 questions.
Okay, I've got the last question over here.
Thanks, Karima. As a chartered accountant, I think I'm taking notes as you gentlemen are speaking. And AG spoke quite well on when an institution loses its focus for existence. Now, Prof, you spoke quite well on issues of black excellence and the need or the opportunity to transform KPMG. But I'd like to ask the question as to why now? Is this now intention or focus on transformation really genuine? And could it not be opportunistic from your side? As you said yourself, the fact that KPMG has historically been one of the most untransformed entities within the audit space. Now suddenly we're supposed to believe that they want to be the poster child for black excellence. So I'm very skeptical in as far as the commitment and genuine focus on that issue of black excellence. Now you spoke also about IRBA being a statutory body and the like, it's like being almost like an all boys club. But I'd like to ask now, specifically with IRBA, because we know it just doesn't have teeth. So then how can you speak of IRBA as being the requisite level of a statutory body that's able to do what it needs to be able to do for the profession?
Right. Thank you for those great questions, panel.
Shall I start, Prof? The question from the gentleman that side, what strong arm would the AG apply? And I'm going to respond to the strong arm that the AG will apply part of the question, because I think you invoked the visits into our rooms and stuff like that by the Guptas. But if you look at our reports, they never attach to a specific individual, because what we normally do in an audit, we test the compliance with the systems, we test the adherence with the internal controls that protect public money. Now, in the last couple of years, if you cast your mind back to the last 10 to 15 years, even when the AG at the time was Terence Nombembe, he had almost reported without fail that there was a persistent flouting of supply chain management processes without due consideration to the consequences that need to follow once that matter has been identified. Issues of financial statements being presented to the office which require to be panel beaten significantly before they can become the real set of financial statements that will be presented to the public. Situations where inappropriate transactions are entered into without the requisite documentation substantiating those transactions. I can put my neck on the line here and say, if you look at all the general reports for the last 15 years, they've almost interchangeably painted that picture, which was drawing attention to a shifting of that core of good corporate governance that was in place, that was supposed to be in place in South Africa. What we've seen, the special representatives, if you like, of that culture have been framed in the name of the Guptas. But there's no doubt in my mind that there are many others who operate in the name of APC, PTY, who were also playing around while nobody was taking care of fixing what was going wrong. So the real essence of this is that we detected that every time that we come and report, the public catches onto the fact that we say there is no consequence for the stuff that we pick up. And that's why we engaged our standing committee on the Auditor General in Parliament, which is a multi-party committee made up of all the parties in Parliament, to try and do something about that part. And that's how the amendment to the Public Audit Act came about. So directly then to your question, the strong arm that at least we think we can manage from our side as an office is the ability to not rely on you, who might well be the wrongdoer, to try and fix that which kind of feathers your own nest. So we want to have that capacity to say, no. Throughout the audit, we have drawn to your attention the fact that there are payments that have been made towards an entity that possibly does not exist with an invoice whose authenticity is questionable, we are not going to ask you then to do something about this, because now we've got the power to take it to its next phase. Why is it that you are paying this entity X billions of rands within 3 months for a professional service? Is it possible that within 3 months a professional service will trigger an invoice, let's say, of 1.2 billion? Kind of question. So that is what we think will be a strong arm in our hands to whoever that supplier may be. So that's effectively, I think, what Parliament has responded to by agreeing to this amendment that we had proposed. So it will be cutting across all our audits. If it's in a municipality, we will raise the material irregularity because we've got a definition that is broad enough to be a catch-all of all of these abuses. For as long as we believe that it is going to result in financial loss or rob the public of the fiscus of those monies, we are going to raise it and report it. But again, having got this amendment, I think it is also important to note that as an audit office, we are not elected by anybody. It still remains in the hands of those that are elected to make sure that they live up to what it is that they signed up for. Because what we'll do through this amendment is to give them more credible information that they did not have before so that they can act. So the actors remains those that are elected, not us. We will just do what we can professionally to surface the issues that may not have seen the light of day in the past. And then lastly, to your question, Mfundis, regarding the social partners, we had embarked on this journey, but predominantly focused on institutions also taking into account the 80-20 rule, where we thought, let's try and target 80% of those that we can reach with 20% of the resources that we have. But I think over the number of years, for example, there was a program that the AG drove where he went door to door to all the municipalities across the country before his term ended in 2013. And that is one community of people that at least were sensitized. Because some councillors were arguing that, I don't know what this thing I'm supposed to do, but I've been elected yesterday as a chair of MPEG. Now, I don't know what to do when I see this thing, because the CFO comes and sits with me and he tells me that everything has gone well. So part of the journey was to empower them to understand that in order for you to ask the right questions, it's not about understanding the intricacies of debits and credits. As a councillor, you know that part of what was in the IDP document of the municipality was to build a bridge where school children are going to cross a river. Just preoccupy yourself with asking where is that bridge, because the money was made available for it. That's all that is required of you. The rest of the technical questions are going to be asked by us. Just find out where's that bridge, because according to the allocation, the money was given. But where's that bridge? Just worry about the bridge. Don't worry about the technicalities of which account should have been debited versus another, because that is going to cause confusion for you. So that part we have covered. We have also embarked on a similar program to engage the media so that as they report to the public, they don't start tripping over themselves, because this accounting language sometimes can be quite confusing or sometimes can be positioned in a way that a person who was not involved in this thing would not easily understand. But the other part of it is also the universities, where we target students, among others, whether they are in commerce or not, but we do that roadshow on an annual basis, including professional bodies. So we are coming to the church.
Thank you very much. Yes, also starting with the question from Reverend Molo. The ethics in the institutions, ethics are taught, are part of the syllabus of training of accountants. And we also, as a profession, are very proud of our code of professional conduct. We always refer to it. For me, the difficult part is that you teach people, they know the right thing intellectually, but how do you embed it in their DNA or consciousness so that it guides the decisions they take and how they conduct themselves? That's the trick. And I believe that I'm not sure how the university would do that, but I'm sure how the audit firms can go about doing it. You know, if what you talk about every day is revenue and meeting that deadline, you never talk about, you ask fewer questions about the quality of work. Whether that pressure by that client, why did you give in to that? And you don't have conversations about quality, about integrity, about independence on a daily basis, and saying that in planning this audit, can we also address these things, which things that pertain to conduct of the client, your own conduct, and then you make sure when you evaluate at the completion of the work, and then in your compensation, key performance areas, there must be consideration of ethical behavior, of quality aspects. They must carry a meaningful weight in your remuneration package. So at the firm level, I'm clearer as to what needs to be done. So I've seen these things in some of the firms. You'll find that possibly 90% of the remuneration is on achieving your financial target. And then when they talk about these things, so-called soft issues, the penalty really doesn't matter. It wouldn't impact on behavior. If one would know that if he fails a review, his file is reviewed, he found to have not have complied with the standards or failed to be independent or skeptical, and that means 40% of your bonus, the culture will change. So there's a lot of power in the firms themselves that using. So that's one issue about ethics. Ethics are taught. On the focus on transformation opportunistic at KPMG, I thought I tried to explain that the KPMG I'm talking about is the new KPMG. Not the KPMG was disconnected to South Africa, that disregarded the outrage of South Africans to state capture and continued to do the business as if there was no state capture, there was no corruption, and got the firm into disrepute, the name of the firm. That KPMG disregarded other priorities of South Africa, like transformation, black empowerment, and all that. That's not the KPMG I'm talking about. I'm talking about the KPMG that we are rebuilding now, reconnecting with South Africa, reconnecting with the main purpose of the audit profession, which should be embraced by KPMG. That's what I'm talking about. So really, transformation is not opportunistic, it's about us reconnecting the new KPMG with South Africa. The ERBA, if ERBA has no teeth, it has nothing to do with it being under the control of auditors or accountants. It has more to do because auditors don't appoint people who serve on ERBA or their committees, and they have no powers to do that. So possibly if you say it is not teeth, it may have to do with their powers. They need additional powers to give them teeth, or it could be with budgetary considerations and the way that they're staffed, they don't have the capacity to fulfill their mandate. It may have those kind of problems, but but it's not because it's captured by the profession. The profession is just not in a position to capture ERBA. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to be the last round. I had two more questions, but I'll shelve it just for your consideration. Minister Bheki Cele announced recently that they're going to be running lifestyle audits on all senior police officers to look at whether they're corrupt or not. Would that not perhaps be a good idea for auditors, particularly those who do work with state companies and municipalities? And then the other thing I wanted to just leave you with is perhaps if should be a time limit that one particular firm can audit a particular government department, and that you should rotate it so that nobody gets too comfortable and nobody gets too set in their ways, and you introduce new people so that you disrupt patterns of patronage if and when they actually do develop. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for your participation. I see the bishop is running up. He's either going to come and talk to you himself or whisper in my ear. I'm not quite sure which it is. He's going to talk. Okay. We also have a cheese and wine gathering outside in the refreshments area. And then, of course, tomorrow, just a reminder that former President Kgalema Motlanthe, of course, will be here at around 11, but we've got some important report back work also to do. Let me hand over to the Bishop.
I just wanted to say four things. The first one is to thank you all very much, including Karima, for your long suffering and being with us throughout the day. Thank you very much. My thanks to these two gentlemen who embarrassed me in public and say that I mean, I'm only a priest. But thank you very much. But just so we are clear about the significance of this session, those of us who were in that room of anchoring democracy, we did talk about the place of the auditing profession for the integrity of the state. That's really where this comes down, which is why this session is so critically important for the work we do. Because if we don't have a good, or you've heard it all, I mean, that last quote was a keeper. But I just want to say then that maybe all of us, as individuals, we ought to be champions of fiduciary integrity wherever we go. And that maybe that's a takeaway that we shall always have to keep for ourselves. So it's a very important session. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Tomorrow, Karima had said this earlier, I'm just repeating it. It's Black Thursday. I've had to do a lot of mea culpas to South Africans for not being in the shutdown march today. And many of us feel like sellouts being here. And so let's make up for it tomorrow. And the Black Thursday, as much as possible, put on your black and come tomorrow in black. It is a day that we recognize against gender-based violence. I do not know why Thursday was chosen, but I also know that Thursday is sometimes referred to as Sheila's Day, because that domestic worker called Sheila takes the time off to go to their church women's group prayer on Thursday afternoons. Whether you see it as Sheila's Day for prayer, it is a time for recognizing the evil of gender-based violence. So let's do that tomorrow. The most important message that I was instructed to come and give here is that those of you who are in parking, please remember you can get a parking token from Violet. Please stand Violet so they know who that is. That's the person you get your parking voucher from, so that you don't have to pay for being here all day. Otherwise, you won't come tomorrow. Now, with the former president here tomorrow, he is actually very good at keeping time. Kgalema does. There is a story that he tells about the danger of keeping time for himself. That when we had the Mandela Memorial Service in Soweto, Kgalema arrived in time for his suite at the stadium. And as it turns out, for some reason, someone had failed to detail somebody to receive the dignitaries. And they all arrived on time. And he appeared to be the one that was planned for this, so he kept on shaking hands. Now, he'll be here like the Chinese tomorrow. That means those who live in Pretoria like me probably should depart Pretoria by 6 o'clock. You'll not fail to be here by 9 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Don't forget to get your parking validations over there. And as I said, there's some refreshments in the refreshments area. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.